Chapter 36. In the middle of the night, Jian Chen and Tai Ta sat under a tree and cultivated quietly. Their torches had already been extinguished. Liang Xiaola sat on a branch that was 5 or 6 meters above the ground behind them. She looked around nervously. Whenever the roar of a wild beast rang out in the night sky, she would become nervous for half a day. How could she dare to sleep in an environment like this? How could she sleep? Liang Xiaola's bright eyes constantly glanced past Jian Chen and Tai Ta, who were cultivating under the tree. It seemed like she was keeping an eye on the two of them. She did not want to see the two people she had encountered after so much difficulty run away right under her nose at a critical moment like this. She would lose her only protection. At this moment, a gentle breeze blew by, causing the surrounding trees to rustle. At the same time, Jian Chen, who had been cultivating under a tree, suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, a sharp gaze shot out from his eyes, directly towards the depths of the forest. Afterwards, he stood up from the ground with a bang, tightly gripping the rusty metal rod in his hand. Liang Xiaola stared at Jian Chen, who had suddenly stood up in confusion. For some reason, she suddenly felt an intense sense of unease from the depths of her heart. "Hey, what's wrong?" Liang Xiaola whispered, and asked carefully. She did not dare to speak loudly in an environment like this, afraid that she would attract the attention of a magical beast. Jian Chen did not answer Liang Xiaola. Instead, he looked at Tai Ta, who was still cultivating, and called out, "Tai Ta, wake up. There's an attack from a magical beast." What did you say? There's an attack from a magical beast? Liang Xiaola paled in fright. Her face became extremely pale in an instant, devoid of blood. Due to excessive fear, her entire body began to tremble. Tai Ta was cultivating, but he still maintained a sliver of vigilance towards the outside world, even though he was cultivating in an environment like this. As a result, when he heard Jian Chen's words, he immediately stopped cultivating and stood up. He picked up the axe and carried it on his shoulder. Changyang Shoten, where are the magical beasts? Iron Tower looked around. Not only did he not find any traces of magic beasts, he did not even hear any movement. Jian Chen slowly turned his head and stared around sternly. He said with a deep voice, "Tai Ta, be careful this time. It's not just one magical beast attacking. It's a group. A bunch." Tai Ta's nonchalant expression immediately vanished when he heard that. It was replaced with a stern expression. What? A group? No way. Hey, I beg you, don't scare me, okay? Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, cried and pleaded. She would rather take these words as Jian Chen's threat to her. Jian Chen frowned, then shouted at Liang Xiaola, who was shouting in the tree, "Be quiet! Are you trying to lure all the magical beasts over here?" Without a doubt, Jian Chen's words were extremely effective on Liang Xiaola. Liang Xiaola immediately covered his mouth with his hand and forced himself not to make a sound. "Changyang Shoten, how many magical beasts do you think there are this time?" Tai Ta asked with a deep voice. "There's a lot. There's at least a dozen. They've made their preparations and have already surrounded us," Jian Chen said sternly. Tai Ta's expression became more and more stern when he heard that. If there was only one magical beast, he could deal with it alone. If there were 2 or 3 of them, it would naturally not be a problem for the 2 of them. However, there were over a dozen of them now. Even with Tai Ta's pride, he could not help but feel a headache coming on. However, when Liang Xiaola heard Jian Chen's words, her pale face became even paler. Her mind was completely filled with fear. Only a single thought circled around in her head. "It's over, it's over. We're dead for sure this time. We definitely won't be able to survive." As the weeds in the distance rustled gently, green specks of light appeared before their eyes, one after another. They were everywhere. There were many specks of light, close to 50 of them. As the specks of light drew closer, Jian Chen and Tai Ta finally managed to see clearly. These specks of light were actually the eyes of magical beasts. There were over 20 of them. These are Class 1 Azure Wolves. Tai-ta! Run to a tree if you can't hold on any longer, Genshin said sternly as he stared sternly at the 20 or so wolves in the surroundings. Tai-ta stared around viciously. He waved his huge axe viciously and roared out heroically, "Don't worry, Changyang Shoten. Aren't there just 20 or so Class 1 magical beasts? I guarantee that they won't be able to return alive." When she heard that there were more than 20 magical beasts attacking this time, Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, paled in fright. At this moment, no matter how confident she was in Jian Chen and Tai Ta, she definitely did not believe that two people who were not even saints could survive the attack of more than 20 magical beasts, unless a teacher from the academy came to save them. "Teacher, where are you? Quickly come and save us." Liang Xiaola's face was filled with fear as she looked at the pairs of green eyes around her. She begged in a low voice. Now, she could only hope that the teachers of the academy would come and save them. Unfortunately, there were so many magical beasts here. She was so timid that she didn't even dare to shout out loud. She was afraid that she would attract the attention of the magical beasts. The 20 or so wolves slowly approached Jianqin and Tai-ta. They stared at the two of them coldly and emotionlessly with their green eyes. They only stopped when they were only 5 meters away from Jianqin and Tai-ta. Jianqin and Tai-ta both gripped their weapons tightly. Even though they were surrounded by over 20 Class 1 magical beasts, they did not show any fear at all. Awoo! Suddenly, one of the green wolves howled at the sky, followed by the other 20 green wolves howling at the same time. Their howls shook the sky, and their momentum was tremendous. The howls of the 20 green wolves overlapped perfectly, forming a powerful sound wave that spread out in all directions. Hearing this incomparably magnificent howl, Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, was scared out of his wits. He almost fell down from the tree. His whole body trembled even more violently. There was no trace of blood on his little face. It was so pale. 5 kilometers away from Jianqin and Tai-ta, a middle-aged man was resting on a tree with his eyes closed. However, when he heard the howls of the wolves, his expression changed slightly. He suddenly opened his eyes and looked in the direction of the howls. Oh no, it's actually a pack of wolves. There are at least a dozen of them. Looks like someone is in danger. The middle-aged man's expression suddenly became incomparably dignified. His hands touched the tree trunk, and his body immediately floated down the tree. After that, without stopping for a moment, he ran in the direction of the wolf pack's howls with the fastest speed he could reach. I hope I can still make it. The middle-aged man's face was full of anxiety. He had already raised his speed to the limit. The students in the second area had yet to reach the Saint Realm, so they had no chance of winning against a pack of green wolves that were all Class 1 magical beasts. At the same time, 3 people in 3 other directions immediately put down what they were doing and ran towards the wolves as fast as they could when they heard the howls of the wolves. The howls seemed to be a signal for the wolves to attack. Afterwards, over 20 wolves charged towards Jianqin and Tai-ta at the same time. "Go die!" Tai-ta roared angrily. He swung the huge axe in his hand with all his might and swung it at the incoming wolves. The sharp edge of the axe made an ear-piercing sound as it cut through the air. Bang! The cyan wolf at the very front was directly struck by Iron Tower's axe, leaving a huge gash on its body. The cyan wolf's clumsy body was directly sent flying far away. Although the cyan wolf was a rank 1 magical beast, it still couldn't withstand Iron Tower's terrifying strength. Tai-ta crazily swung the huge axe in his hand. The huge axe, which weighed more than 100 pounds, was held in his hand as if it was weightless. Every wolf that approached him was ruthlessly sent flying by his huge axe. Not a single one was able to get close to his body. Almost every wolf that was sent flying by him was left with a terrible wound on their body. However, because the skin of these wolves was very tough, Even with Tai Ta's astonishing strength, it was impossible for him to kill a wolf so easily. Jianshin's eyes immediately sharpened when he saw the wolves pounce towards him. He took a step forward and stabbed his iron rod towards the throat of the wolf closest to him. Spurt! After some resistance, the iron rod finally pierced through the wolf's skin and entered its throat. Afterwards, Jianshin immediately pulled out the iron rod. At the same time, he slightly moved his feet and dodged the wolves that were pouncing towards him. The wolf that had its throat pierced by Jianshin fell to the ground powerlessly. Its 4 limbs continuously scratched the ground as it desperately struggled to get up. However, no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't stand up. Bright red blood continuously flowed out from its throat. The throat was a fatal weakness for every living creature. Even magical beasts were no exception. Now that the wolf's throat had been pierced, its life was quickly slipping away. At this moment, it was only struggling on the verge of death. It simply wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Jianshin relied on his nimble movements to move through the pack of wolves. He used the tip of the iron rod in his hand to continuously leave wounds on the wolves' bodies. Even though he was surrounded by more than 10 wolves, Jianshin relied on his unpredictable movements to move around with ease. Those wolves' sharp fangs and claws simply couldn't hit Jianshin. Every time there was danger, Jianshin would always be able to narrowly dodge. The battle only lasted for a few breaths of time. 3 wolves had their throats pierced by Jianshin and lost their ability to fight. At this moment, they were powerlessly lying on the ground, struggling on their deathbed. There was only one outcome waiting for them, and that was death. As for the remaining wolves that surrounded Jianshin, many of them were injured. However, the wounds were either fatal or at the joints of their limbs. Jianshin constantly moved through the pack of wolves. The iron rod in his hand continuously stabbed out. His movements were incomparably fast, but also boundlessly elegant. It was as if he was singing and dancing, and not experiencing a battle to the death. On the other side, Tai Ta constantly roared. His huge axe that weighed over 50 kilograms was swung so hard that even water couldn't penetrate it. Gradually, illusions began to appear. The dozen or so wolves surrounding him were constantly sent flying by his attacks. Almost every wolf had a few abnormally terrifying wounds on their bodies. However, these wounds were all left behind by Tai Ta's random attacks, so they weren't fatal to the wolves. Chapter 37. In just a few seconds, another wolf had died at Jianshin's hands, while countless more were injured. Liang Shaola did not hear Jianshin and Tai Ta's cries at all as she hid in the tree. Instead, she constantly heard the pained cries of the wolves. Out of curiosity, she suppressed her fear and opened her eyes to look down. However, her eyes widened in the next moment. She stared at Tai Ta and Jianshin, who were fighting the wolves, in disbelief. She was so shocked that she could not even speak. Every time Ta Ta swung his axe, he would send a green wolf flying far away. As he continued to swing his axe, not a single green wolf could get close to him. Moreover, those green wolves were covered with terrifying wounds and were dripping with blood. As for Jianshin, he quickly moved through the pack of wolves, constantly changing his range to dodge the attacks that came from all directions. As he stabbed out with his staff, he would constantly add bloody holes to the wolves around him. Liang Shaola was unable to catch his movements clearly with her eyes. Most of the time, she could only see a blurry shadow flash by. Liang Shaola, who had never experienced any bloody scenes before, was shaken to the core by what happened below. After understanding the situation below, Liang Shaola's fear gradually faded. Even so, she still trembled slightly. After all, this was the first time she had experienced such a bloody scene. No matter who it was, they would not be able to adapt to it. At this moment, a wolf took advantage of Tai Ta's carelessness and bit his right shoulder viciously. Its sharp teeth pierced deeply into Tai Ta's flesh. Immediately, blood flowed from Tai Ta's shoulder. The intense pain caused Tai-Ta's facial muscles to twitch slightly. Looking at the wolf that was still biting his shoulder, a trace of madness flashed through Tai-Ta's eyes. The expression on his face instantly became ferocious. He immediately threw away the axe in his hand and grabbed the wolf's head with his right hand, forcibly pulling it off his right arm. Immediately, the wolf's sharp teeth left a deep bite mark on Tai-Ta's right arm, and its huge mouth finally left Tai-Ta's arm. Tai-Ta's hands tightly pinched the two halves of the green wolf's mouth. The veins on his arms bulged, and his entire arm quickly swelled up. He suddenly let out a furious roar and exerted force with both arms. In the end, the green wolf let out a miserable howl and directly tore the green wolf's mouth into two halves. Immediately, bright red blood splashed out from the green wolf's body and sprayed onto Tai-Ta's body, dyeing him red. Iron Tower's actions deterred the surrounding green wolves. Looking at the two halves of their companion's corpse, the surrounding green wolves all stopped in their tracks. There was a clear trace of fear in their eyes. However, Tai-Ta did not plan on letting the wolves go. He tossed away the corpse in his hand and grabbed the axe stuck in the ground, directly chopping at the head of a wolf. The wolf tilted its head slightly and dodged Tai-Ta's axe. Afterwards, it let out a short howl at the sky and lunged at Tai-Ta with its huge mouth wide open. The fear in the eyes of the other wolves immediately vanished when they heard the howl. They all bared their teeth and lunged at Tai-Ta once more. Tai-Ta directly kicked the wolf in the stomach and sent it flying far away. Afterwards, he swung his axe, and the sharp edge of the axe directly landed on the neck of a wolf beside him. Immediately, the wolf's head flew high into the air. Blood spurted out from the wolf's neck like a fountain. Tai-Ta did not stop at all after chopping off the wolf's head. He immediately swung his axe to block the incoming wolves. Pum! A wolf could not dodge in time and was viciously struck in the head by Tai-Ta's axe. The wolf's head was directly chopped into pieces by Tai-Ta's axe, and it died instantly. After being injured, Tai-Ta clearly became even more ferocious. In the blink of an eye, he had already killed 2 wolves. On the other side, Jianqin was also fiercely fighting with more than 10 wolves. At this time, a wolf leaped high into the air and pounced at Jianqin, whose back was facing Jianqin. At this time, Jianqin suddenly turned around and stared sharply at the wolf in the air. The iron rod in his hand stabbed out like lightning, directly piercing the wolf's abdomen and piercing through its heart. After this attack, Jianqin immediately withdrew his iron rod. His body slightly swayed, and he had already left this position. Just as Jianqin left, several wolves pounced at the position where he had just been standing. The wolf that had its heart pierced by Jianqin's iron rod let out a miserable cry. It fell to the ground and did not get up. Then its entire body slightly sobbed and quickly stopped breathing. The battle continued. As time passed, more and more wolves died at the hands of Jianqin and Tai-Ta. Gradually, the pressure that the two faced quickly decreased. When the iron rod in his hand stabbed into the throat of the last wolf, Jianqin had already killed a dozen wolves that had attacked him. However, Jianqin's clothes were not stained with too much blood because of this. Jianqin looked in Tai-Ta's direction and saw that there were still 7 or 8 wolves there. However, the wolves were already covered in vicious wounds and bathed in blood. Tai-Ta's tattered clothes that had already been pierced by the thorns became even more tattered, almost becoming strips of cloth. His clothes no longer covered his body, revealing Tai-Ta's firm chest. Even one of his pants had been completely torn apart. There were many bloody wounds on Tai-Ta's body as well. Jianqin did not hesitate in the slightest. Holding the iron rod, he rushed towards the wolves that were besieging Tai-Ta. His hands were extremely fast as he stabbed towards the throats of 8 wolves. Because these wolves were all heavily injured by Tai-Ta, and because they had been fighting with Tai-Ta for so long, they were a little exhausted. Therefore, Jianqin killed them very easily, almost effortlessly. In just 8 strikes, he had ended their lives, each strike accurately hitting the wolf's throat. When all the attacking wolves were killed, Jianchen could not help but feel a little out of breath. After all, his current strength was still too weak. Fighting with so many magic beasts that were stronger than him at one time was not a small consumption for him. Tai Ta let out a long breath, looking at the corpses all over the ground. A trace of a happy smile appeared on his face. Although he had just experienced a difficult battle, there was not the slightest trace of fatigue on his face. Instead, his spirit was trembling. Changyang Shoten, we've killed all the Class 1 magical beasts that attacked us. Tai Ta's voice was filled with excitement. This was the first time he had killed so many Class 1 magical beasts since he was young, so he could not help but feel rather excited. Jianchen smiled. Looking at the wounds on Tai Ta, he asked, "You're injured. Are they serious?" Tai Ta lowered his head to look at the wounds on his body. He did not seem to care at all. It's fine, it's fine. Although the bites hurt a lot, they're all superficial wounds. Hee, I've always been thick-skinned since I was young. Regular beasts can't hurt me at all. Hearing that, Jianchen nodded in agreement. He immediately stopped worrying. He had experienced Tai Ta's toughness firsthand. It was not an exaggeration to say that Tai Ta's body was as tough as steel. It was quite impressive that the wolves could bite through Tai Ta's skin. "Oh, right. Changyang Shoten, are you injured?" Tai Ta glanced at Jianchen with concern. Jianchen shook his head and smiled. "Don't worry, those wolves can't hurt me." With that, Jianchen shifted his gaze slightly and looked at the bushes up ahead. He called out, "Haven't you seen enough after watching for so long? I wonder how long you're going to hide." Tai Ta was slightly surprised by Jianchen's strange voice. A sliver of doubt appeared in his eyes, but he soon returned to his senses. Immediately, his eyes shone brightly as he looked in the direction Jianchen was looking at. He gripped his axe tightly with both hands. "Who's hiding there? Come out, or I'll cut you down with my axe," Tai Ta roared out. With that, the bushes up ahead began to rustle slightly. With a rustle, for figures gradually appeared before Jianchen and Tai Ta. Tai Ta immediately became alert when he saw the 4 black figures. However, Jianchen did not move at all. He only had a faint smile on his face. Although he could not see their faces clearly due to the darkness of the night, Jianchen had already guessed their identities. The 4 black figures stopped when they were only 2 meters away from Jianchen and Tai Ta. At this time, Jianchen and Tai Ta could clearly see their faces. They were clearly 2 middle-aged men, an old man and a middle-aged woman around 30 years old. At this moment, the 4 of them were completely shocked. Their expressions were blank, as if they had seen something unbelievable. "For teachers, it's actually you." Tai Ta clearly recognized the 4 of them and called out in surprise. The 4 of them recovered very quickly, but a sliver of deep shock still remained in their eyes. "Changyang Shoten, no wonder there's a rumor in the academy that you can defeat a saint in the air. I didn't believe it at first, but it looks like the rumor is true. Your strength really is not as simple as it seems on the surface. You can kill over a dozen Class 1 magical beasts by yourself with a broken metal rod. Even students who have condensed saint weapons are nowhere close to your strength." The old man looked at Jianchen with a smile. His voice was filled with admiration. Jianchen smiled. "You're too kind, teacher. I'm not as powerful as you make me out to be. These magical beasts may be Class 1 magical beasts, but their attacks are all weak. If I really do come across a powerful Class 1 magical beast, I probably won't be able to handle them so easily." Hearing that, the old man looked at Jianchen with a sliver of admiration. He then turned to Tai Ta and smiled. "Tai Ta, you're very powerful as well. No wonder the headmaster thinks highly of you and accepted you as a disciple." Tai Ta rubbed his head and smiled foolishly. He was immediately at a loss for words. "Elder Yin, it looks like the 4 of us have come for nothing this time. With the 2 of them together, what magical beast in the second zone can harm them?" At this moment, the middle-aged woman in her 30s chuckled. Chapter 38. By the way, Changyang Shoten, how did you discover us? One of the middle-aged men asked, his tone full of doubt. Hearing this, the other three people suddenly became interested and looked at Jianchen. The four of them were also very curious about how Jianchen discovered them hiding in the bushes. This was because they did not make any sound while hiding in the bushes. Logically speaking, it was impossible for Jianchen, who was so much weaker than them, to discover them. Jianchen smiled and said, Actually, I knew when you four teachers came. What? You discovered us as soon as we came? How is that possible? The woman exclaimed in disbelief. The other three people also looked at Jianchen in disbelief. Jianchen said, Although I was fighting with the wolves, I was always paying attention to the movements around me. Otherwise, how could I always avoid the attacks from all directions at the most critical moment? Hearing this, the four teachers nodded and agreed with Jianchen's explanation in their hearts. Jianchen continued to explain, Teachers, although you hid in the side and did not make any sound, you made too much noise when you came. You did not hide your figures at all, so I discovered you immediately. Only with that did the four of them come to a realization. The old man continued to praise, Impressive, impressive. Changyang Shangtian, I can't help but admire you now. You're even more outstanding than we imagined. Back then, when I was your age, I wasn't even half as capable as you. At this point, the old man paused and continued, Since you are no longer in danger, then we should leave. After all, we still have to protect the other students. With that, the four teachers did not have the slightest reluctance and turned to leave. Wait, Jianchen suddenly called out to the four teachers, then pointed at Liang Xiaola, who was hiding in the tree, and said, Teachers, can you help send this student out? She is too timid and is really not suitable to survive here. Hearing this, the elder frowned and thought for a while before saying, That's not a problem. However, if she leaves now, even if she pays 2 Class 1 monster cores, it will still be considered a failure. After all, she hasn't stayed here for 3 days. No, I won't go out. I must stay here for 3 days before I go out. Liang Xiaola's voice came from the tree. Then she jumped down from the branch that was 5 or 6 meters above the ground. Her footsteps shuffled as she walked over the corpses of the green wolves and arrived in front of Jianchen and Liang Xiaola. Hey, now that there are 4 teachers leading you out, there are no demonic beasts that can harm you. Why aren't you going out? Tai Ta's tone was rather displeased. Liang Xiaola was just too timid. She would make a fuss as soon as she saw a demonic beast, which annoyed Tai Ta greatly. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta a little timidly and said softly, I don't want to go out. Are you not afraid of the demonic beasts? Tai Ta asked curiously. I am. Since you're afraid, then why don't you go out? Aren't you guys here? Tai Ta, who had a simple personality and was not good with words, was immediately at a loss for words. Jianchen looked at Liang Xiaola a little helplessly and tried to persuade her. Student Liang Xiaola, you should go out with the 4 teachers. There are too many demonic beasts in this forest. It's not suitable for you to stay here. Liang Xiaola suddenly became pitiful. Perhaps she also understood that Jianchen was the backbone of the two, so she looked at Jianchen and begged, Senior, please let me go with you guys. Because this is the first time I've seen a demonic beast, and the first time I've come to this kind of place, I can't help but feel a little scared. But I promise you, I won't randomly shout when I see a demonic beast in the future, okay? After seeing the strength of Jianchen and Tai Ta, Liang Xiaola no longer had to worry about encountering any danger by their side. Moreover, she heard very clearly that even the 4 teachers in front of her said that the demonic beasts in the 2nd district were no longer a threat to them. With such a good protective umbrella, Liang Xiaola naturally would not give up so easily. Jianchen immediately had a headache. Liang Xiaola, a spoiled noble lady, would definitely be a huge burden by their side. They would have to take care of her while fighting against the demonic beasts. Changyang Shoten, with the strength of the 2 of you, There are no demonic beasts in the 2nd district that can pose a threat to you. Why don't you bring her along? Students should help each other. Moreover, this is also a test for the two of you." The middle-aged woman said with a smile. Jianqin sighed inwardly. Since the teachers had suggested that the two of them bring Liang Xiaola along, he could not find any reason to refuse. Since Jianqin had agreed, even if Taita was dissatisfied, he would not say anything. In fact, after this day of interaction, Taita had already faintly regarded Jianqin as the backbone in his heart. Taita would not reject anything that Jianqin decided on. After all, not only was Jianqin more intelligent than Taita, but his strength and survival experience in the forest were also much better than Taita's. It could be said that Jianqin had convinced Taita wholeheartedly in all aspects. After the 4 teachers left, Jianqin and Taita ignored Liang Xiaola and went to clean up the corpses of the wolves. After all, there were over 20 Class 1 monster cores. They would not let them go to waste. Since the monster cores of the wolves were in their brains, Jianqin and Taita had to smash the heads of the wolves if they wanted to retrieve the monster cores. This incomparably cruel and bloody scene made Liang Xiaola's face turn pale. However, after experiencing what had just happened, perhaps Liang Xiaola's mentality had changed slightly. She actually did not turn her head away. She forcefully suppressed the fear in her heart and stared straight at Jianqin and Taita's actions. It seemed like she was learning from them. The night quickly passed. Since the attack of the wolves, not a single magical beast came to harass Jianqin and the others. When the first light of dawn slowly rose from the horizon, Jianqin, who was sitting cross-legged under a tree, also slowly opened his eyes. He then stood up from the ground and casually moved his slightly stiff body. Just as Jianqin stood up, Taita also opened his eyes and stood up from the ground after hearing the movement. Although the two of them were cultivating, they maintained a trace of vigilance towards the outside world in this environment. As long as there was any movement in the wind, it would not be able to escape the two of them. Taita, go find some dry branches to start a fire. I'll go clean up the magical beast meat. It's time to make some breakfast. Jianqin said indifferently, "Oh." Taita did not have any objections. He turned around and walked into the forest to look for dry branches. Soon, Taita came back with a bundle of dry branches. At this time, Jianqin also prepared a large piece of bloody magical beast meat. The meat was taken from the wolf he killed last night. Since there was no water here, the meat was not washed. He directly skewered it with a wooden stick and began to roast it over the fire. Not long after, the magic beast meat on the fire emitted a fragrant smell. Although no seasoning was used, the quality of the magic beast meat was already very high. Even if no seasoning was used, the taste was very good. Moreover, the higher the level of the magic beast, the more delicious the meat was. Moreover, it had great benefits for the body. It was said that eating the meat of a 5th-rank magic beast could also improve one's strength to a limited extent. Perhaps because she smelled the fragrance of the magical beast meat, Liang Xiaola, who had fallen asleep at some point in time, slowly woke up. She then jumped down from the tree. A height of 5 or 6 meters was nothing to Liang Xiaola, who had at least 80% of Saint Force. Wow, it smells so good. Liang Xiaola skipped over to the fire. She could not help but gulp as she looked at the golden-colored, magical beast meat dripping with oil. Although she had eaten a lot of exotic delicacies, she had never eaten such wild game before. After all, she had eaten meat every day for over 10 years. But when she suddenly changed her taste, even if it was cabbage, she would feel that it was much more fragrant than those delicacies. Taita looked at Liang Xiaola with some dissatisfaction and muttered softly, "You were crying and screaming when you came here last night. You've forgotten so quickly. I hope you won't cry when we meet the magical beasts later." Taita's voice was very soft and vague. Other than himself, even Jianqin could not hear what he was muttering. Liang Xiaola looked at Taita curiously. "Taita, what are you talking about?" Liang Xiaola already knew the names of Jianqin and the others from the 4 teachers last night. "Ah, it's nothing." Tai Ta waved his hand. From the looks of it, he seemed to have a guilty conscience. Liang Xiaola did not mind. She looked at Jianchen and Tai Ta and smiled. "No wonder you're so strong, able to kill over 20 Class 1 magical beasts with just the 2 of you. So you're Tai Ta and Chongyang Shoten. I'm really lucky to have met you." Right now, Liang Xiaola looked like a completely different person from last night. It had only been one night, but she seemed to have already thrown yesterday's matter to the back of her mind. At this moment, there was not the slightest trace of fear brought about by the magical beast on her face. Jianchen picked up the roasted magical beast meat, tore off a piece, and threw it to Liang Xiaola. "There are a lot of magical beasts in this forest, and we won't go out until 3 days have passed. Aren't you afraid?" Liang Xiaola took the magical beast meat, put it in her mouth, and gently bit it, then said, "Although I am a little scared, but I believe that I will not be afraid when I get used to it. And the 2 of you are not much older than me. But last night, in the face of more than 20 ferocious green wolves, not only did you not show the slightest fear, but you also killed all those green wolves. This is much better than those boys, Humph. Those useless boys. 5 of them couldn't beat a magical beast. And as a result, I and my good sisters were separated." Liang Xiaola suddenly stood up and said loudly, "I've decided now. I must take advantage of these 2 days to learn from the 2 seniors." Hearing this, Jianqin nodded secretly. Liang Xiaola's words had obtained Jianqin's initial approval. Although she was timid and very afraid of magical beasts, these were not important. What was important was that she could change and learn. After all, no one knew everything the moment they were born. They could only rely on themselves to learn everything. Of course, Jianqin was an exception. Chapter 39. After breakfast, Jianqin and Tai Ta continued on their journey with their weapons in hand. However, a petite figure followed closely behind them. It was Liang Xiaola. Liang Xiaola was empty-handed as she stared around cautiously. She had lost her weapon when she fled the previous day. Tai Ta carried his axe. He had already changed his clothes. They were made from a piece of azure wolf hide that had been sewn together with grass roots. His original uniform had become tattered after the battle with the azure wolf the previous night. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. Although Jianqin and Tai Ta's harvest was not as good as the first day, it was still quite good. They had killed over 70 magical beasts in total, which made Liang Xiaola extremely envious. Liang Xiaola had changed a lot during the day. She had become much tougher after the attack from the azure wolf the previous night. At the very least, she no longer cried out in fear when she saw magical beasts. Moreover, as the magical beasts died one after another at the hands of Jianqin and Tai Ta, Liang Xiaola had developed a certain level of immunity to the bloody scene. She gradually adapted to it. Moreover, she had actually learned quite a lot from Jianqin and Tai Ta about surviving in the forest, as well as her ability to predict danger. Her talent and ability to learn amazed Jianqin. Jianqin had already guessed that if Liang Xiaola maintained this state, her future achievements would definitely not be too low. Of course, the most important factor was her talent in cultivation. After all, on the Tianyuan continent, where the strong reigned supreme, one's own strength was the ruler of everything. Liang Xiaola was extremely smart. Although she did not do much during the day, she did not cause any trouble for Jianqin and Tai Ta. She also did not become a burden to them, like Jianqin and Tai Ta had imagined. Whenever the 2 of them fought against magical beasts, she would always watch from afar. After a day, both Jianqin and Tai Ta had a whole new level of respect for Liang Xiaola. They no longer looked down on her like before. In the evening, Jianqin and the other 2 sat by the fire, roasting a large piece of magical beast meat. "Seniors, have you really not condensed a saint weapon and become a saint?" Liang Xiaola stared at Jianqin and Tai Ta with her bright eyes, and asked curiously. After a day of running around, Liang Xiaola's clothes had a few holes. These were all scratched by the thorns and branches in the forest. Her small face had completely become a dirty little cat. In this forest, without water, they had to rely on the blood of magical beasts to quench their thirst. Liang Xiaola had no way to wash the dirt off her face. If we had a saint weapon, why would we use this broken axe? Tai Ta looked at the axe that had curled up and had many nicks on it and complained. After continuously being chopped by Tai Ta's abnormal strength, even the axe was a little unable to withstand the extreme. The axe was no longer as sharp as before. Even the originally sharp tip of Jianqin's rusty iron rod was almost worn flat. Liang Xiaola looked at Tai Ta and Jianqin with a face full of admiration. You two are really amazing. You can kill a first-rank magical beast so easily before becoming a saint. In my opinion, when you two become saints, you will probably be able to fight a second-rank magical beast alone. Jianqin disagreed and said, how could it be that easy? These magical beasts were all raised by the Academy. They belong to the category of magical beasts that do not have any offensive abilities. That's why it was so easy for us to kill them. Once we encounter magical beasts with strong offensive abilities, it will be very difficult for us to kill them. Hearing this, Liang Xiaola nodded seriously and said, that's right. I've heard my father say before that some of the more powerful first-rank magical beasts can already spit out low-level magic. Their destructive power is very strong. Some ordinary saints are not their opponents. Jianqin looked at Tai Ta, who was staring blankly at the dancing flames, and said, Tai Ta, the second area is no longer a challenge to us. I want to go to the third area tomorrow. What are your plans? Tai Ta thought for a moment when he heard that. That's right. I can already easily deal with the magical beasts in the second area. They are indeed no challenge to us. All right, Changyang Shoten, I'll go to the third area with you and see just how powerful the second-rank magical beasts there are. Hearing their conversation, Liang Xiaola's expression changed slightly. No way. The two of you haven't even reached the Saint Realm. Yet you want to hunt Class 2 magical beasts in the third region? Although the two of you are very strong, Class 2 magical beasts are much more powerful than Class 1 magical beasts. Without a saint weapon, you might not be able to deal with them. Moreover, the fur of Class 2 magical beasts is much thicker than that of Class 1 magical beasts, and their defense is very strong. With your broken axe and rusty iron rod, it would be very difficult to injure them, let alone kill them. Moreover, I heard that the environment in the third region is much worse than here. There are poisonous insects and snakes everywhere, and there are also swamps. The slightest carelessness will cause you to lose your life. It is very dangerous, so I don't recommend you to go to the third region. Tai Ta looked at his and Jianqin's weapons when he heard that. He said bitterly, yeah, Changyang Shoten, after 2 days of fighting, my axe is no longer as sharp as before. Even your weapon has become blunt. It'll probably be very difficult to kill second-rank magical beasts. Jianqin smiled and said, there's no rush. I think there are still quite a few students in the second area. The reason why we haven't met them yet is because we've already left them far behind. We'll head back tomorrow and use our monster cores to trade for weapons. I'm sure they'll be very happy. Yeah, that's a good idea. Tai Ta nodded in agreement. Jianqin continued, Liang Xiaola, let's split up tomorrow. You should be able to make it through the last day safely with the other students. After all, those who can last 2 days here all have some real ability. Liang Xiaola nodded and said nothing. She was clearly rather dejected right now. After all, she knew how dangerous the third area was. It was still very difficult to say whether Jianqin and Tai Ta could deal with the magical beasts. If she insisted on following them, Jianqin and Tai Ta would not agree to it. Even if she really did follow them, she would only become a burden for them to retreat. The night passed very quickly without any incident. When the sky had just turned gray, Jianqin and Tai Ta finished cultivating for the night, and began to prepare breakfast. Only after the three of them had breakfast did the sun slowly rise from the horizon. Afterward, Jianqin and the other two continued on their journey. However, they headed back this time. After 2 days of battle, the two of them had become much more vigilant against danger, so they returned extremely quickly. Under a large tree, 9 students in tattered clothes were sitting powerlessly, panting heavily. They were a combination of commoners and nobles, but at this moment all 9 of them were in tattered clothes, with many dried bloodstains on them, and all of them were wounded. Not far from them, there was a corpse of a magical beast lying on the ground. Everyone hold on. This is already the last day. After today, we'll be able to leave, a commoner student said as he panted slightly. It's a pity that we don't have enough magic cores. We're still missing 5. It seems that we still need to hunt 5 more magical beasts, said a young man who was born in a noble family. Originally, these aristocratic children disdained to stay with these commoner students, but after they saw those ferocious magical beasts, they were all scared out of their wits. At this critical moment of life and death, who would care about the issue of one's identity? Protecting one's own life was the most important thing. Therefore, those aristocratic children gradually walked together with the commoner students. After all, many people understood the principle of strength in numbers. Moreover, these commoner students might have grown up in a harsh environment, but when faced with those ferocious magical beasts, they actually didn't cower in the slightest. This made those aristocratic children who had always looked down on them look at them in a new light for the first time. Gradually, everyone became friends. Moreover, as they continued to fight with the magical beasts, the 9 of them became more and more familiar with each other. In the end, they actually formed a rare contract, which caused the 9 of them to become more and more harmonious. At this moment, a trace of movement suddenly came from the weeds in the distance. Everyone be careful, there's a magical beast attack. A person who reacted quickly immediately shouted. Immediately, the 9 of them stood up from the ground and vigilantly stared at the direction of the strange movement. As the weeds swayed more and more violently, finally, a burly man dressed in animal skin appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Just as the burly man in animal skin appeared in front of everyone's eyes, 2 more figures walked out from behind him. Although their clothes were tattered, they still wore the uniform of Kargath Academy. Perhaps because they had been shuttling through the weeds for a long time, the 3 people's faces were all black. There were still some broken pieces of grass on their heads. Only their facial features could be seen. Their appearance was already very unrecognizable. Seeing that it was humans and not magical beasts that appeared in front of them, the 9 students immediately let out a sigh of relief. Then, a trace of a happy smile appeared on their faces. At a time like this, if a few more people could join them, it would directly increase their overall strength. It would also be much easier to hunt magical beasts. Moreover, they were not stupid. They all understood that the people who could survive until the 3rd day were definitely not weak. These 3 people were Jianqin, Tower, and Liang Xiaola. After rushing back for half a day, they finally discovered a group of people. As it was already the last day of the 3-day period, there were not many people who continued to stay in the forest. Most people had already directly given up and left, so there were very few students who remained in the forest now. At this moment, when Liang Xiaola's gaze landed on a beautiful girl in the group of 9, his face immediately revealed an expression of pleasant surprise. Alisa. Liang Xiaola's face was filled with excitement. After letting out a cry of pleasant surprise, he immediately ran towards the beautiful girl as if he was flying. Hearing this somewhat familiar voice, the young girl blinked her big bright eyes. She suspiciously stared at Liang Xiaola, who was dashing towards her. However, at this moment, Liang Xiaola's small face was blurry and looked like a little tabby cat. Even if this girl called Lisa was very familiar with her, it was still very difficult to recognize Liang Xiaola from her appearance. Liang Xiaola rushed in front of the girl, and opened his arms to hug her tightly with an excited expression. His voice was filled with joy. "Lisa, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you had already left." Chapter 40. That's right, Lisa. I'm Xiaola. Liang Xiaola's voice was filled with excitement. "Xiaola, it really is you. That's great. I thought you'd left already. I never thought I'd be able to see you here." After confirming Liang Xiaola's identity, the girl called Lisa was also overjoyed. She hugged Liang Xiaola excitedly. At this time, an extremely wretched-looking young man walked in front of Liang Xiaola and the girl who were hugging each other. He said with a smile, "Liang Xiaola, I didn't expect that we would meet again in the forest after being separated. This really makes me feel very happy." "Hello, I'm very happy to meet you here. I wonder if you're willing to join our team. I believe that with your addition, our team will become even stronger, and it'll be easier for us to hunt magical beasts. Moreover, we'll be able to look after each other in this forest that's fraught with danger." At this moment, a young man in the same tattered clothes arrived before Genshin and Lisa as he spoke in a pleasant tone. However, when he saw Genshin's blood-soaked uniform, he could not help but reveal a sliver of surprise. He did not believe that the blood came from Genshin's body. Otherwise, if a person lost so much blood, they would have become extremely weak already. It would be impossible for them to remain standing there with such a steady expression and such a sharp gaze. Genshin shook his head slightly and declined politely, "Sorry, we're planning to leave, so we can't stay with everyone." Hearing that, a sliver of regret appeared in the young man's eyes. However, he still tried to persuade them. "Fellow students, although the magical beasts here are far too powerful, we have the advantage in numbers. As long as we work together, even if we encounter two magical beasts at the same time, they won't pose a threat to us. I'm sure we'll be able to gather the 2 Class 1 monster cores that each of you handed in very quickly." The young man still refused to give up. He had a good eye. He could tell that Jianqin and Taita were quite powerful. "That can't be helped. The 2 of us have already decided to leave this place, so we can't be with everyone. Please forgive us." Jianqin's tone was very amiable. Hearing that Jianqin and Ta wanted to leave, the young man couldn't help but reveal a trace of regret in his eyes. He simply couldn't understand. There was only 1 day left before the 3-day deadline. As long as they paid 2 Grade 1 monster cores, they would be able to pass. Yet, at this time, Jianqin and Ta actually wanted to leave. Could it be that they wanted to give up on this opportunity? The young man thought that Jianqin and Jianqin had given up on leaving the forest. He would never have thought that what Jianqin and Jianqin were talking about was actually leaving the 2nd area to go to the 3rd area and not leaving the forest. At this moment, Tower's gaze landed on the giant axe in the hands of a burly student. His eyes immediately lit up with joy. He then walked up to the burly student and said in a low, muffled voice, "Hey, I'll give you 2 Tier 1 magic cores. Why don't you exchange your axe with mine?" As he said that, Taita removed the axe from his back, while his other hand pulled out the 2 blood-stained Grade 1 monster cores from his space belt. At this moment, everyone was shocked to discover that the giant axe in Tower's hand was stained with blood. The entire surface of the axe was dyed red with blood. It looked extremely frightening, as though it had drunk countless amounts of blood. What made everyone feel even more incredulous was that this axe, which was made entirely out of iron and was no weaker than steel, was already riddled with holes. Moreover, some parts of the axe had even curled up. Seeing this scene, most people were in disbelief. Almost all of them believed that when Taita chose his weapon back then, the weapon was already in this shape. They simply couldn't believe that Taita had completely chopped the axe into this shape. The burly student stared blankly at the blood-red axe in front of him that was riddled with holes, as if it was condensed from blood. He was at a loss for what to do. When the other students heard Taita's request, their eyes immediately lit up. They looked at the burly student with envy, as if they couldn't wait to exchange their weapons with Taita. "Fellow student, I'll use the sword in my hand to trade with you." A student holding a giant sword came in front of Tai Ta and said with a smile. Hearing this, Tai Ta looked at the huge sword in the student's hand, then shook his head and said, "No, I still prefer using axes." Hearing this, the student's face was filled with disappointment. At this time, the 2 Class 1 monster cores were more important than anything else. Not to mention him, if it was possible, even the other students would be willing to exchange their weapons with Tai Ta for the 2 Class 1 monster cores. Even if their weapons were more valuable than the 2 Class 1 monster cores, they wouldn't hesitate. The burly student wasn't stupid. After being stunned for a moment, he immediately exchanged the axe in his hand with Tai Ta with a face full of joy. Who wouldn't be willing to do such a profitable trade? After Tai Ta used 2 Class 1 monster cores to exchange for an axe, everyone immediately looked at Tai Ta in a different light. Some of the smarter people had even linked the axe to Tai Ta's current state. From this point alone, it was enough to prove Tai Ta's extraordinary strength. Otherwise, how could he casually take out 2 Class 1 monster cores? After all, this wasn't the outside world. Before coming to the forest, the academy had already taken away all the storage devices of the students. Even their bodies had been carefully searched. It was impossible to bring in a monster core from the outside world. There was only one way to obtain a monster core here, and that was to hunt magical beasts. However, there was still one thing that everyone couldn't understand. Since Tai Ta and Jianqin had the strength to hunt magical beasts, why did they leave before 3 days had passed? After all, the Academy's rules stated that they had to survive in the forest for 3 days and hand over 2 Class 1 monster cores to pass. Both were indispensable. Could it be that he doesn't care about the reward at all? Or was he just lying to us when he said he was leaving? Is it really because he doesn't want to hunt magical beasts with us? Everyone could not help but think like that. As soon as they thought of that, some people immediately looked at Jianqin and Tai Ta with dissatisfaction. Jianqin did not care about everyone's expressions. He looked at Liang Xiaola, who was hugging another girl, and said, "Liang Xiaola, since you found your friends, why don't you stay with them? It'll be better if there's more people." Liang Xiaola slowly separated from the girl. She glanced back at Jianqin and Tai Ta before nodding gently, "Then be careful." Afterwards, Jianqin and Tai Ta didn't stay any longer. They directly left. Once the 2 of them had left, the girl called Lisa asked with some dissatisfaction, "Xiaola, who are they? Why are they so arrogant, refusing to stay with us?" "Lisa, you've misunderstood them. It's not that they don't want to stay with us. They really do want to leave," Liang Xiaola explained. "That can't be." Lisa's face was filled with disbelief. "Lisa, seeing that they can casually take out a Class 1 magic core, this means that the 2 of them already have the strength to kill a Class 1 magic beast. Moreover, they just used 2 Class 1 magic cores to exchange for weapons with us. This action clearly shows that they want to continue fighting. How could they possibly leave this place?" "That's right. Xiaola, you've probably been tricked by them," a young man added from the side. Liang Xiaola smiled. "They do want to leave, but they didn't explain it clearly to you. They want to leave the 2nd region and head to the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts." "What? Liang Xiaola, are you kidding me? They want to head to the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts? How could that be possible? Could it be that they've attained the Saint Realm? But that doesn't make sense. If they possess the strength of a Saint Realm expert, then why would they exchange weapons with us? The 2 of them are really courting death. They actually want to head to the 3rd region. They're purely courting death." As soon as Liang Xiaola finished speaking, it caused the others to discuss animatedly. Without exception, no one felt that Jianqin and Tai Ta would be able to survive in the 3rd region. Lisa held Liang Xiaola's hand and asked with a tone of obvious disbelief, "Xiaola, they wouldn't really go mad and head to the 3rd region, right?" Liang Xiaola nodded. "Exactly. They really do intend to head to the 3rd region. Lisa, you must not underestimate them. They're actually very formidable." Liang Xiaola had a serious expression on his face. Could it be that they've attained the Saint Realm? Lisa spoke with surprise. The Academy had clearly stated that those who had attained the Saint Realm had to head to the third region. It was utterly impossible for them to appear in the second region. Liang Xiaola shook his head. No, they haven't attained the Saint Realm because they haven't condensed a Saint weapon at all. The surprise in Lisa's eyes grew when she heard this. It was already extremely difficult for those below the Saint Realm to survive in the second region, let alone the third region. After all, the magical beasts in the third region were all Class 2 magical beasts, and they were much stronger than the Class 1 magical beasts in the second region. The two regions couldn't be compared at all. Even those who'd condensed a Saint weapon and attained the strength of a Saint Realm expert would find it extremely difficult to kill a Class 2 magical beast. It required a few people to join forces to deal with one. Lisa was a very good friend of Liang Xiaola, so Liang Xiaola didn't hide anything from her. He lowered his voice and said, "Lisa, let me tell you. Yesterday, I saw the two of them kill over 70 magical beasts in a short period of a day." Lisa turned pale with fright when she heard this, and she exclaimed, "What? Xiaola, you're not joking, right? The two of them killed over 70 magical beasts in a single day." Lisa was extremely shocked. She didn't suppress her voice at all, and when she finished speaking, her voice grew louder and louder. As a result, the other 8 people heard her clearly. Immediately, everyone's expressions changed, and they quickly thought of Genshin and Yi Xi, who came with Liang Xiaola, and then they all revealed expressions of disbelief. "Lisa, what are you talking about? The two of them killed over 70 Class 1 magical beasts in a single day," a young man asked. He didn't believe that the two of them referred to Genshin and Yi Xi, who they just met. Chapter 41. No way. Liang Xiaola, aren't you exaggerating a little too much? Two people who aren't even saints actually have the ability to kill over 70 magical beasts in a single day? How is that possible? A young man holding a spear said in disbelief. "Yeah, that's too much. Let alone a saint. I don't think even a great saint would be able to kill over 70 Class 1 magical beasts in a single day. They'd probably die of exhaustion halfway through. I don't believe that their saint force is limitless." The one who spoke was a young girl with a longbow. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears. At this moment, the young man who had invited Genshin and Taita to join their group suddenly asked, "Liang Xiaola, do you know who those two are? When did such powerful people appear in our Kargath Academy? They're not even saints yet, but they can easily kill magical beasts of the first order." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. Liang Xiaola's face was filled with pride, as if he had done something glorious. He said leisurely, "I can tell you. Actually, the big guy who exchanged axes with you is the famous Taita in the academy. He's the direct disciple of the headmaster. The other person is the new king who won first place in this year's freshman competition, Changyang Shoten." Everyone exclaimed in unison. Then they immediately began to talk about it. "It's actually those two freaks. No wonder they're so powerful. Isn't that so? I heard that Taita fought young Master Qing to a draw in the library, that Changyang Shoten defeated St. Kadun. That battle was very intense. I watched it from below. Changyang Shoten is indeed very powerful. I heard that outside the library, Luo Jian, who is an intermediate saint, couldn't do anything to Changyang Shoten without using a saint weapon. In the end, he was even forced to take out his saint weapon. Without Liang Xiaola as a burden, Genshin and Taita's speed increased a lot. They quickly entered the third zone. When they first entered the third zone, it didn't seem any different from the second zone. However, as the two continued to advance, they gradually discovered the viciousness of the third zone. Compared to here, the second zone could be called heaven. In the third region, there were many kinds of poisonous insects in the jungle. Moreover, there were many swamps on the ground. If one was not careful, one would sink deep into them. Fortunately, these swamps seemed to be man-made and were not deep. Otherwise, if one accidentally fell into them, one would definitely die if there was no one to help them. Perhaps because of the environment, the third zone didn't have as many weeds as the second zone. It was very wide. Jianchen and Taita moved through the forest carefully. They were now covered in a layer of powder. The powder was a mixture of several types of plants, which could effectively prevent the bites of mosquitoes in the area. Changyang Shodan, you seem to be very familiar with the forest. Have you stayed here before? Why are you even more powerful than me? Taita looked at the layer of green powder on him and asked. Jianchen chuckled. I've read a lot of books in the library, and there are quite a few records about this. That's why I know quite a bit about surviving in the forest. Oh, no wonder. Taita seemed to have understood. At this moment, Jianchen's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately became stern. At the same time, the ground began to tremble slightly as if an earthquake had occurred. However, Taita was already on guard when Jianchen spoke. He already held the axe that was on his shoulder with both hands. Jianchen stared to the left with a rather stern gaze. He said, Taita, be careful. I saw that we encountered a large, magical beast this time. Yes. Taita nodded firmly. He immediately became stern. After all, the magical beasts they encountered in the third zone were not Class 1 magical beasts. They were Class 2 magical beasts that were much stronger than Class 1 magical beasts. They were no weaker than great saints. Even though the attacks of the magical beasts here were not very powerful, they still did not dare to underestimate them with their current strength. Under the nervous gazes of the two, a huge magical beast finally appeared before their eyes. This magical beast was covered in fiery red fur. It was extremely large, 3 meters tall and 5 meters long. 2 snow-white fangs protruded from its mouth. The fangs were as thick as a fist and a meter long, and the tip of the fangs were extremely thin. It was obvious that the fangs possessed a very strong penetrative force. If it weren't for the fact that this magical beast's nose was extremely short, Jianchen would have thought that he had encountered an animal that only existed in his previous world, an elephant. However, in terms of size, this magical beast was a full size larger than an elephant. Be careful, Taita. This is a fire cloud beast with relatively strong defense among Class 2 magical beasts. It can spit fire from its mouth. It's very difficult to deal with. Jianchen immediately said the name of the magical beast. Having read a large number of books in the library, he already knew many magical beasts. He also had a better understanding of the specialties of those magical beasts. Taita nodded slightly and did not answer. He stared at the fire cloud beast vigilantly. He was ready to attack at any time. Roar! The huge fire cloud beast roared at the sky. It slowly approached Jianchen and Taita with its thick hooves. The ground shook violently with every step the fire cloud beast took. Jianchen's eyes flashed. He immediately called out, I'll attack it from the front. Taita, you go around to its back and attack. With that, Jianchen pushed off the ground and leapt high into the air. He directly landed on the fire cloud beast's head. As soon as Jianchen moved, Taita left where he was as well. He circled around the fire cloud beast and arrived behind it. Jianchen called out as he stood on the fire cloud beast's head. Saint Force quickly gathered on the metal rod in his hand before he suddenly stabbed it at the fire cloud beast's head. Ding! With a metallic sound, Jianchen's rod only left a shallow mark on the fire cloud beast's head. It was actually unable to break through its defenses. Jianchen's face changed slightly. Although he already knew that the fire cloud beast's defenses were very powerful, he never thought that it would be so abnormal. His full-powered attack was actually unable to break through its defenses. At the same time, Taita leapt high into the air as well. He swung his axe at the fire cloud beasts, but as hard as he could. But his situation was not much better than Jianchen's. Taita's axe only managed to scratch the skin on the fire cloud beasts, but it did not cause any damage to it at all. Their attacks had clearly angered the fire cloud beast. It roared at the sky before quickly swinging its head, sending Jianchen flying far away. Flying in the air, Jianchen quickly adjusted his body's condition. His feet tapped lightly on the trees on both sides to slow down the force of his fall. Finally, he landed firmly on a branch. After sending Jianchen flying, the fire cloud beast suddenly turned around and opened its mouth to bite at Tai Ta. Tai Ta leapt up and dodged the fire cloud beast's huge mouth. At the same time, he viciously swung his axe at the fire cloud beast's long teeth. Ding! Following the sound of metal clashing, the fire cloud beast's teeth were broken by Tai Ta's axe. However, after breaking the fire cloud beast's teeth, 5 nicks appeared on Tai Ta's axe. Roar! The fire cloud beast was enraged. It stomped its 4 hooves and charged at Tai Ta. A vicious light flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. He did not dodge at all when he saw the fire cloud beast charging at him. He tossed away the axe in his hand and used his hands to grab the 2 snow-white tusks of the fire cloud beast. Immediately, the 2 of them were in a stalemate. At that moment, Tai Ta seemed to have become a beast. He growled as he grabbed the fire cloud beast's tusks tightly. He was actually competing with it in terms of strength. Even though Tai Ta was born with great strength, he was just too small compared to the fire cloud beast. As a result, even though he was quite strong, he was still pushed back by the fire cloud beast. His feet had already left 2 deep marks in the ground. Arg! A sliver of madness flashed through Tai Ta's eyes. He roared at the sky as the veins on his arms bulged. His arms rapidly swelled in an instant, and he suddenly exerted force with his arms. Bang! With a crisp sound, the snow-white fangs of the fire cloud beast were broken by Tai Ta. The fire cloud beast cried out in agony from the intense pain. Tai Ta seemed to have become furious as well. He did not show any mercy. He held the tusks in his hand and used the tip of the tusks to stab the fire cloud beast's head. The other end of the tusks was extremely sharp, no weaker than a sharp weapon. Even so, the tusks only managed to pierce the fire cloud beast's skin, causing blood to spurt out. Seeing how Tai Ta had actually injured it with his fangs, the fire cloud beast's eyes immediately became bloodshot. It opened its gaping mouth at Tai Ta and roared furiously. A huge fire snake shot out from the fire cloud beast, burning towards Tai Ta. Immediately, the temperature in the surroundings began to rise at an unbelievable rate. Tai Ta's face changed drastically when he sensed the shocking heat wave from the fire snake. He fled in a hurry, but even so, he was unable to completely escape the fire snake's attack. His entire body was engulfed in flames. Jianchen paled in fright when he saw Tai Ta completely engulfed in flames. He immediately snapped off a lush branch beside him and kicked off the branch forcefully. He shot towards Tai Ta like a cannonball. Roar! The fire cloud beast let out a furious roar and walked with heavy steps towards Tai Ta, who was engulfed in flames. It then opened its bloody mouth again and bit towards Tai Ta. It was not afraid of the flames on Tai Ta's body at all. Just as the fire cloud beast's mouth was about to reach Tai Ta, Jianchen also arrived in front of Tai Ta. He waved his hands and used the lush branch in his hand to wrap around Tai Ta. Before the fire cloud beast's mouth could reach him, he forcefully pulled Tai Ta away and quickly retreated over 10 meters away from the fire cloud beast. Jianchen agilely removed the branch wrapped around Tai Ta. Then he ignored the scorching flames on Tai Ta's body and reached his hands into the flames, tearing apart the wolf skin on Tai Ta's body. The flames on Tai Ta's body were almost all caused by the fur on the wolf skin. So after removing the wolf skin, Tai Ta immediately escaped from the flames, revealing the tattered school uniform underneath. Chapter 42. Tai Ta, are you all right? Jianchen asked with concern. Tai Ta shook his head and let out a long sigh. He said in a muffled voice, I'm fine. It's just that I'm very hot. It's so hot that I feel terrible. That's good. Jianchen immediately let out a sigh of relief. He had been really worried that something would happen to Tai Ta when he saw him surrounded by raging fire. At this moment, Jianchen's eyes suddenly narrowed. He turned his head slightly and glanced at a certain spot in the dense foliage behind him. A gleam of light flashed through his eyes, and the corners of his mouth curled up into an imperceptible smile. Boom! 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 The ground trembled slightly. The fire cloud beast approached Jianchen and Tai Ta with heavy steps. The ground shook slightly with every step it took. Red flames constantly spat out from its mouth, as if they would shoot out at any time. Tai Ta stared at the approaching fire cloud beast solemnly and said in a deep voice, "Changyang Shodan, this big guy's skin is very hard. How are we going to kill it?" Jianchen also stared at the approaching fire cloud beast solemnly and said, "The fire cloud beast is wrapped in a layer of very hard skin. Unless we're all saints, we can only break its skin with our weapons. Now it seems that we can only break through its eyes and attack its brain from there." As soon as Jianchen finished speaking, the fire cloud beast roared angrily. It opened its mouth and spat out a hot fire snake again. Jianchen and Tai Ta hurriedly jumped away. Jianchen held the iron rod tightly in his right hand and shouted at Tai Ta, "Tai Ta, go attract its attention." "Don't worry. Leave it to me." Tai Ta picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at the fire cloud beast. He then ran to the other side. The stone flew in the air and accurately hit the fire cloud beast, hitting its fangs that had been broken by Tai Ta. The broken fangs seemed to be the pain of the fire cloud beast. The fire cloud beast's eyes immediately turned red and bloodshot. It kept spitting fire at Tai Ta. Jianchen stared sharply at the fire cloud beast that had been attracted by Tai Ta. He held the slightly bent iron rod tightly in his hand. Then he quickly ran from the side of the fire cloud beast to its head. Jianchen was extremely fast. As he ran, his feet did not touch the ground. He ran on the short grass of the grassland as if he was dancing in the air. In a short moment, Jianchen arrived below the fire cloud beast's head. He did not care about the intense heat coming from the fire snake. Jianchen jumped up high. When he was at the same height as the fire cloud beast's head, his right arm suddenly shook. He drove the iron rod towards the fire cloud beast's fist-sized eye. Although Jianchen was very fast, the fire cloud beast's reaction was not slow either. Just as the iron rod was about to reach its eye, it suddenly closed its eyes. Jianchen's eyes flashed. Success or failure depended on one move. At this moment, he focused his mind. Under his powerful senses, he slightly adjusted the direction of the iron rod. The tip of the iron rod was originally aimed at the fire cloud beast's eye, but now it pierced through the gap between the fire cloud beast's eyelids. The iron rod easily pierced through the gap between the fire cloud beast's eyelids without any resistance. Immediately, bright red blood gushed out from the fire cloud beast's eye. Roar! The excruciating pain caused the fire cloud beast to let out a miserable scream. The sound shook the sky and spread far and wide in all directions. Jianchen's right arm exerted force again. The iron rod pierced deeper into the fire cloud beast's eye, trying to pierce its brain directly from the eye. The fire cloud beast's screams became more and more miserable. Then its head shook quickly, trying to get rid of the iron rod in its eye. However, the iron rod had already penetrated its eye, so it was not so easy to get rid of it. Moreover, there was a person on the iron rod. The more it shook its head, the more intense the pain was. After shaking its head twice, the more intense the pain was, so the fire cloud beast did not dare to move its head at all. The fire cloud beast continued to scream. In the end, its huge body directly collapsed to the ground. It struggled painfully on the ground. Although the wound was not fatal to it, the piercing pain was something its brain could not endure. Seeing the fire cloud beast on the ground, Jianchen's eyes lit up with joy. He immediately yelled, "Tai Ta, use more force, and pierce the iron rod deeper. This task was best left to Tai-Ta, who was born with extraordinary strength. Okay, I'm coming. Tai-Ta ran over excitedly. He could see the dawn of victory now. Tai-Ta quickly approached the fire cloud beast. He extended his hand and grabbed the iron rod in its eye. Then he forcefully pushed his right hand in. Immediately, the 1-meter-long iron rod completely entered the fire cloud beast's eye. Only a small part of his fist remained outside. Roar! The fire cloud beast let out a high-pitched scream. It was so loud that Jianchen and Tai-Ta felt their eardrums ache. After the scream, the fire cloud beast seemed to have lost all its strength. Its huge body gently sobbed a few times on the ground before it stopped moving. Its other eye also slowly closed. Seeing that the fire cloud beast was finally dead, Jianchen and Tai-Ta could not help but let out a sigh of relief. Although the fire cloud beast was not very powerful among Class 2 magical beasts, its defense was outstanding. It was very difficult to kill it. It's finally dead. This magical beast is so hard to deal with. It can even spit fire. It burned all my hair away. Tai-Ta rubbed his big bald head with a gloomy expression. Jianchen chuckled. He looked at Tai-Ta's tattered uniform that did not cover his body and said, "You should wear this." With that, Jianchen took out another wolf pelt from his spatial belt. Jianchen and Tai-Ta had prepared many of these wolf pelts. There were still quite a few in his spatial belt. He planned to use them all to make clothes. After all, who knew how many battles they would have to go through in the forest? A single set of clothes was far from enough. Tai-Ta did not hold back. He took the wolf pelt and quickly made a simple set of clothes. Afterwards, Jianchen and Tai-Ta took out the monster core from the fire cloud beast's brain and set off on their journey once more. Just as Jianchen and Tai-Ta disappeared into the woods, a red figure fell from a lush tree. It was a tall woman in fiery red clothes. She was about 30 years old. Although she was not very beautiful, she looked gentle and quiet. The woman looked at the fire cloud beast's corpse. There was still a trace of shock in her eyes. After taking a deep breath, the woman murmured in a low voice, "Tai-Ta, Changyang Shodan, you two really live up to your reputation. You're actually so powerful. You're not even a saint, but you can kill a fire cloud beast that specializes in defense with only 2 ordinary iron weapons. This really surprises me. It seems that I have to report this to the Vice Dean." With that, the woman used her movement technique and quickly left. Not long after the woman left, another 5 youths with weapons in their hands arrived. The 5 youths' faces were dark, and it was impossible to see their faces. However, they were wearing tattered school uniforms. In their hands, 3 of them were holding great swords. One of them was holding a machete, and the last of them was a burly youth holding a sledgehammer. "From the sound of it, the roar just now should have come from here," said one of the young men with a huge sword. The young man with the machete nodded and said, "That's right. If that magical beast hasn't gone far, then it should be nearby." At this point, the young man's voice paused slightly. His eyes stared straight ahead and cried out in alarm, "Look, what is that?" As he spoke, the young man pointed his finger forward. Hearing that, everyone looked over. Sure enough, they saw a fiery red object the size of a small mountain lying on the ground. It looked very much like a magical beast. "Let's go take a look." Very soon, the 5 of them arrived in front of the magical beast. However, when they recognized it, their faces immediately became serious. An experienced young man crouched before the corpse of the fire cloud beast and dipped his hand in its blood. He said, "This is a fire cloud beast. Its defenses are very powerful, but its attacks aren't very powerful. However, its blood hasn't dried up yet, and there's still some heat. Clearly, it died not too long ago. Looks like it was the one that roared just now." A young man with a huge sword looked around before looking in the direction that Jianchen and Tai-Ta had left in. He said, "Let's go." Let's chase after them immediately and see just who killed this fire cloud beast. If they're strong enough, we can recruit them and hunt magical beasts together. If they're too weak—" With that, the young man smiled evilly. Hearing that, the other 4 young men seemed to think of something. They all smiled evilly. Afterwards, the 5 of them quickly chased after Jianqin and Tai Ta. Jianqin and Tai Ta made their way through the forest carefully, since they had to be wary of magical beasts that could appear at any time and the difficult swamps on the ground. The 2 of them did not move quickly. At this moment, Jianqin's ears trembled slightly. He immediately stopped Tai Ta and said, "Be careful! Someone's catching up from behind." Hearing this, Tai Ta immediately stopped and turned his head to look behind him curiously. Very soon, the people behind them appeared before Jianqin and Tai Ta. There were 5 of them in total. Due to their dark faces, Jianqin was unable to make out their appearances. However, the weapons in their hands all gave off powerful pulses of Saint Force. When the 5 young men discovered that it was only the 2 of them, a sliver of joy appeared in their eyes. They looked at each other, and as if they had agreed to this beforehand, they actually sped up and arrived before the 2 of them at the same time, surrounding them. Seeing this, Jianqin and Tai Ta both had a bad feeling. "May I ask what the meaning of this is?" Jianqin asked with a deep voice. One of the young men waved the huge sword in his hand and smiled evilly. "What do we mean? What do you think we mean?" "Obediently hand over your space belts, and we will definitely not make things difficult for you. Otherwise, humph, humph, humph." The large man with the hammer said with a cold smile. Tai Ta's face suddenly changed when he heard that. He said furiously, "You want us to hand over our space belts? Humph, don't even think about it." Tai Ta now understood what the young men were trying to do. They were actually trying to rob them. Jianqin gently patted the space belt around his waist and sneered, "The space belt is right here. All the monster cores we've hunted are in there. Come and take them if you can." Even though they knew that the 5 of them were all saints, Jianqin and Tai Ta showed no fear at all. Chapter 43. Jianqin and Tai Ta both quickly dodged. In the past 2 days, Tai Ta had experienced too many battles with magical beasts, so he had gradually grasped some fighting experience. While dodging, Tai Ta swung the already chipped axe towards one of the people's thighs. But the opposite group was obviously not so easy to deal with. Just as Tai Ta's axe was about to hit that person's thigh, a huge sword flew horizontally and collided with Tai Ta's axe. Dang! With the sound of metal clashing, Tai Ta's axe was immediately blocked. Even so, the terrifying force of the axe was unreservedly transmitted to the huge sword. Suddenly, the young man holding the huge sword felt his entire arm shake violently. The powerful force of the shock made the web between his thumb and forefinger feel faintly numb. The young man was shocked and quickly exclaimed, "Everyone be careful. His strength is very strong. It's best not to meet him head-on." Hearing the young man's warning, the other 2 people who were dealing with Tai Ta immediately became cautious and tried to avoid the huge axe in Tai Ta's hand. On the other side, Jianqin and the 2 young men holding huge swords were also fiercely fighting. Although the weapon in Jianqin's hand was only a rusty iron rod, but in addition to being inferior to Tai Ta in terms of strength, Jianqin's overall strength was more than 1 level higher than Tai Ta's. After contending with the opponent for a while with his flexible body, Jianqin caught a flaw in the opponent's defense. The iron rod in his hand pierced towards one of the people's thighs with lightning speed. Because they were all students of the same academy, Jianqin did not dare to kill them. Only injuring them was enough. Jianqin's iron rod pierced out very quickly, and before the student had time to react, the iron rod had already pierced deeply into his thigh. Ah! The young man let out a scream. The pain made his face turn pale in an instant, and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Hearing his companion scream, the other young man who was attacking Jianqin changed his expression slightly. He stopped attacking Jianqin and hurriedly supported his companion, asking, "Harry, are you all right?" Although the young man did not continue to attack Jianqin, Jianqin did not plan on letting him go. With a slight sway of his body, he arrived before the young man. All the saint force within him gathered in his hand before he directly slammed it towards the young man's chest. Jianqin's attack was extremely fast. By the time the young man reacted, Jianqin's hand had already silently approached him like a venomous snake, before mercilessly striking his chest. Bang! The young man was sent flying by Jianqin's nearly full-powered strike. While he was still in the air, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. After dealing with the two young men, Jianqin immediately went to support Taita. Taita had already fallen into a bitter battle. He had already endured many attacks from the three of them, and the wolf pelt he wore had already been cut into many places, causing blood to flow out. If it were not for the fact that Taita's body was extremely tough and he was born with great strength, preventing the three of them from clashing with his axes, he probably would have been beaten to the ground by them already. With the addition of Jianqin, the pressure on Taita immediately lessened. Jianqin's battle prowess was so great that it was not something a regular saint could compare to. After a few short clashes, the three young men had all been defeated by Jianqin. They were all injured to varying degrees, lying on the ground in pain. They had already lost the ability to escape. Jianqin looked at the wounds on Taita and asked in concern, "Taita, are you all right?" Taita shook his head indifferently. "I'm fine. My body is very strong." With that, Taita pointed at the 5 people lying on the ground in pain. "What should we do with them?" Hearing that, Jianqin thought for a moment before smiling strangely. He said, "Taita, take off their space belts. Return them after you've taken out all the monster cores." The faces of the 5 people on the ground changed when they heard Jianqin's words. They paled slightly, and some of them even became furious. They had only obtained the monster cores after 2 days of life-or-death battles. There was only half a day left until the deadline of 3 days. If they lost the monster cores now, they definitely would not be able to complete the Academy's mission. Taita snickered. Without any hesitation, he immediately did as Jianqin said. He removed all the space belts from the 5 of them while Jianqin stood there with the bloody rod in his hand. He stared at the 5 of them like a tiger watching its prey, preventing them from suddenly doing anything. The 5 youths originally planned to resist, but when they saw the bloody rod in Jianqin's hand, they immediately gave up and obediently let Taita take off their belts. After taking off their belts, Taita took out all the monster cores inside. He then casually threw the space belts beside them and began to count. After counting, the 5 of them had a total of 12 monster cores, all of which were rank 2 monster cores. Jianqin chuckled as he took out 6 monster cores and put them into his space belt. He said happily, "Taita, we'll split these monster cores in half. The remaining 6 are yours." All right. Iron Tower did not stand on ceremony. He excitedly put away the remaining 6 magic cores into his pouch. But when the 5 youths heard Taita's name, their expressions changed and became very unsightly. There was probably no one in Kargath Academy who did not know Taita's name. He was the dean's disciple. Although he had not yet become a saint, in the entire Kargath Academy, no one was willing to offend Taita. At this moment, the 5 youths were full of regret. If they had known that one of the 2 was Taita, they would not have come to rob the dean's disciple. But now, not only were the 5 of them robbed by Taita, but they did not dare to retaliate because of Taita's identity. They could only suffer in silence. After putting a few rank 2 monster cores into his space belt, the smile on Taita's face became even more brilliant. He excitedly said, "Changyang Shoten, you're still the best. You defeated the 5 of them so quickly. I, Taita, have followed the right person." Jianqin smiled and said, "All right, let's continue on our way." I hope we can use this time to hunt some more magical beasts for our daily cultivation." Afterwards, Jianqin and Tai Ta did not even look at the 5 youths on the ground. They continued into the forest. When Jianqin and Tai Ta vanished from sight, one of the youths finally could not help but curse. "Fuck, we're really unlucky this time. We actually ran into the dean's disciple. And now not only did we fail, but we've been robbed instead. And we don't even dare to get even with them. How unlucky." As soon as the youth finished speaking, the person with the sledgehammer said, "That's not necessarily the case. Don't forget that it's not just one person who robbed us. There's another person as well." Everyone's eyes lit up when they heard that. "You're talking about Changyang Shoden?" The tall and sturdy youth with the sledgehammer nodded and said, "That's right. Tai Ta has the backing of the dean, so we don't dare to touch him. But Changyang Shoten is different. But Changyang Shoten is very strong. Just now, all 5 of us were defeated by him. How can we beat him?" One of them said, "That's right. And most importantly, Changyang Shoten's attack speed is just too fast. I can't even dodge." The one who spoke was the youth who had been stabbed in the thigh by Jianqin. At this time, the person with the sledgehammer suddenly said, "Don't forget that Changyang Shoten has offended many people in the academy. Whether it's young Master Cheng or young Master Luo, they're all much stronger than us. As long as we find an opportunity to join forces with them, we'll be able to get our revenge sooner or later." In the blink of an eye, the sky had slowly darkened. The number of magical beasts in the 3rd area was obviously much lower than in the 2nd area. After half a day, Jianqin and Tai Ta had only found a few magical beasts. Every time they killed a magical beast, Jianqin and Tai Ta had to go through a tough battle. In the afternoon, they had only obtained a total of 7 Class 2 monster cores. Compared to the number in the 2nd area, this number was insignificant. However, when they thought about how the 5 saints had only obtained 12 monster cores in 2 days, they felt relieved. The 3rd area wasn't as peaceful as the 2nd area. Perhaps it was because Class 2 magical beasts were harder to kill, and they were very few in number, so many people resorted to robbing. After Jianqin and Tai Ta had encountered the 5 robbers, they had encountered 3 more groups of robbers. The smallest group had 4 people, while the largest group had 7 people. After a tough battle, Jianqin and Tai Ta obtained the final victory. The other party's monster cores were also collected by Jianqin and Tai Ta. However, what made Jianqin depressed was that there was a group of 4 that didn't have a single monster core. They had actually just been robbed. Even so, they still managed to plunder 33 Class 2 monster cores from the other 2 groups. At night, Jianqin and Tai Ta sat in front of the fire roasting magical beast meat. There was a trace of fatigue on both of their faces. After half a day, they were more tired than fighting magical beasts for an entire day in the 2nd area. However, at this moment, Tai Ta's school uniform had disappeared. His upper body was bare and his legs were bare. Only the important parts were covered with a piece of animal skin. He looked like a savage. However, Tai Ta's naked body was covered with more than 10 scars of various sizes. Although they looked abnormally fierce, they were actually just superficial wounds. They didn't hurt Tai Ta's muscles and bones. This strong physique made Jianqin jealous. Jianqin wasn't much better than Tai Ta. Although his school uniform could barely be worn, there were still many wounds on it. However, the whole set of school uniform was completely dyed red with blood. It was so red that it was black. At this moment, faint sounds of fighting came from afar. Jianqin's hearing was very sharp. He immediately caught a very subtle sound. Chapter 44. Tai Ta did not pay much attention to that. It's probably someone fighting with a magical beast. Jianqin agreed with that. However, with the memories of his past life, he had experienced things that Tai Ta could not compare to. In this environment, even the slightest movement would alert Jianqin, especially after being robbed by his schoolmates during the day. Jianqin became more and more vigilant of his surroundings. Jianqin had seen far too many people fail miserably at a simple task. He did not want to become one of them. Jianqin tried his best to listen to the movements in the distance with the subtle sounds that his ears caught. However, his brows gradually furrowed. He could already tell that it was not someone fighting with a magical beast, but two groups of people fighting each other. Moreover, the sounds of fighting were rapidly approaching them. Jianqin looked at Tai Ta and said, Tai Ta, it's not someone fighting with a magical beast. It's two groups of people fighting. Moreover, from the sounds of it, they're rapidly approaching us. Prepare yourself. There might be a battle later. Jianqin did not choose to change his position. With their strength, they could protect themselves here. Moreover, he was not someone who was afraid of trouble. Tai Ta immediately became interested. He picked up the axe beside him and said, Someone's probably been robbed again. Changyang Shoten, do you think we should go and take a look? Jianqin sat down cross-legged in front of the fire with his iron rod in hand. He said, No need. If nothing unexpected happens, they'll be able to reach us very quickly. Oh. Tai Ta sat down obediently. His face was extremely calm. Very soon, the sounds of fighting in the distance became louder and louder. Even Tai Ta could hear it clearly. Before long, several figures fled from the distance, running towards the fire that Jianqin and Tai Ta had lit. Behind them, black silhouettes kept flashing in the night sky. It was obvious that they were chasing after them. My two friends, the people behind us, are here to rob us of our magic cores. Not only are they extremely powerful, they also have more people than us. I hope that we can work together to fight them. Otherwise, the magic cores that we've painstakingly collected over the past 2 days will all end up in their pockets. Someone shouted from afar. Although Jianqin's group was only 2 people, if they joined, the strength of both sides would at least be equal. Hearing this voice, Jianqin frowned slightly. This voice gave him a familiar feeling, as if he had heard it somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. Obviously, he didn't have a deep impression of it. Seeing that the 4 fleeing people were getting closer and closer to Jianqin, a figure suddenly shot out from behind at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of the 4 people, blocking their path. Then he raised the huge sword in his hand and slashed at the person closest to him. The person fleeing at the front didn't back down either. He raised the saint weapon in his hand and fiercely slashed at the huge sword. Dang! The difference in strength between the two was clearly too great. With a low rumble, the person fleeing at the front was directly sent flying by the huge sword. In this short moment of delay, the pursuers had caught up with them. They surrounded the escaping people and attacked them fiercely. There were a total of 8 people chasing after them, and none of them were weak. The huge difference in numbers caused the escaping people to be suppressed by the other party. They bitterly held on, and it wouldn't be long before they were defeated. Luo Jian, just you wait. I definitely won't let you go. An angry roar sounded from one of the fleeing people. The voice was clearly deep. Hearing this voice, Jianqin's face abruptly changed. Unlike before, this deep voice was extremely familiar to him. It was the voice of his big brother, Changyang Hu. Big brother! Jianqin called out. His voice was filled with surprise, and his eyes immediately sharpened. Without any hesitation, he charged towards the fleeing people with his metal rod. Seeing Jianqin's actions, Tai Ta followed closely behind Jianqin with his huge axe. After 3 days of interaction, Tai Ta seemed to have become completely obedient to Jianqin. Even Tai Ta probably didn't realize this himself. Actually, Tai Ta had been completely convinced by Jianqin's extraordinary battle prowess over the past 3 days, as well as his rich experience in surviving in the forest and his ability to think through problems. Jianqin's feet did not touch the ground as he quickly ran through the grass. He was extremely fast, approaching the 2 parties in the blink of an eye. The metal rod in his hand turned into an undetectable black streak in the night sky as he stabbed towards one of the people. From the person's figure and the direction of the voice, he had already recognized the person who was attacking. It was his big brother, Changyang-hu. Although everyone had noticed Jian Chen and Tai Ta long ago and had been on guard at all times, Jian Chen's speed was just too fast. There was no warning at all. Furthermore, everyone's vision was greatly affected by the sound of the night, so no one noticed the metal rod in Jian Chen's hand that was only as thick as a finger. The tip of the metal rod stabbed deeply into the shoulder of the person attacking Changyang, who, directly piercing through. Immediately, a miserable cry rang out in the dark night. Afterwards, before the injured person could react, Jian Chen kicked him in the chest, sending him flying far away. Arg! At this moment, Tai Ta charged over as well. With a bellow, he raised his axe with both hands and swung it at one of the people. The person attacked by Tai Ta reacted quickly as well. He showed no fear at all when he saw the incoming axe. He directly raised his huge sword to receive it. Clang! With a great sound, Tai Ta's axe and the person's huge sword collided heavily. The two weapons separated as soon as they came in contact. Tai Ta stood where he was without moving at all, while the young man who had clashed with him was sent flying by the great force of the axe. Unless the difference in strength was too great, no one would be Tai Ta's opponent in a direct clash with the innate strength of Tai Ta. The young man who had clashed with Tai Ta suffered quite a bit from that single clash. However, another chip had appeared on Tai Ta's axe after the clash. Fortunately, the opponent was not very powerful. The energy contained within the saint weapon was still within the limits of the axe, or Tai Ta's axe probably would have been destroyed long ago. Arg! Tai Ta roared out furiously as he charged at the others with his axe again. Seeing this, two of the robbers immediately went to deal with Tai Ta. Clang! With the sound of metal clashing, a person who didn't know Tai Ta's background clashed with Tai Ta's weapon again. Immediately, without exception, he was sent flying by the powerful force of Tai Ta's axe, causing another chip to appear on Tai Ta's axe. Although Tai Ta's axe was very hard, it was far from comparable to a saint weapon. This was because every saint weapon contained powerful energy. By relying on a saint weapon, one could unleash an attack that far exceeded one's own strength. However, these people were obviously too weak. Almost all of them were at the early stage of the saint realm. Even if the saint weapon could increase their attack power, it was still very limited. With such a small gap in strength, Tai Ta could use his natural advantage to balance them out. Even so, the axe in Tai Ta's hand could not withstand too many collisions. Be careful. He's extremely strong. Don't clash with his axe, the person who had been sent flying hurriedly warned. With his companion's warning, the remaining young man immediately became cautious. He no longer clashed with Tai Ta's axe. Instead, he used the gaps in Tai Ta's attacks to attack. Jian Chen did not stop after injuring a person with lightning-like speed. With a slight twist of his staff, he shot towards the other person who was fighting Changyang, who like a ghost. Under the cover of the night, the iron rod that had been dyed red to the point that it was almost black was like a venomous snake hiding in the dark. It was extremely fast and silent as it wandered in the dark night sky, making it difficult for people to notice. Jian Chen's staff stabbed out extremely quickly. Before the person fighting Changyang, who could react, the tip of the staff had already pierced through his thigh. The person's expression suddenly changed. He let out a painful groan. His face was filled with pain, and he could not help but slow down his attacks. At this moment, Changyang, who did not hold back at all, he swung his huge sword down and viciously chopped down on the young man's left arm. Immediately, the person let out a miserable cry. The bones in his right arm had been severed by Changyang's sword. It drooped down powerlessly. Only the skin below the bones was still connected. Blood gushed out from his arm like a fountain. At this moment, a green light flashed in the night sky. A huge sword covered in a layer of green light slashed towards Gentian at an extremely fast speed. Wind Saint Force. Seeing the huge sword covered in green light, Gentian's expression became slightly more serious. Following that, he began to move in a profound manner. His body suddenly disappeared from where he was like a ghost. At the same time, the huge sword covered in green light slashed towards where Gentian had been standing at an extremely fast speed. Gentian stopped 3 meters away, not far from where he had been standing. A person holding a huge sword stood there proudly. The person wore a tattered school uniform and was covered in blood. His face had already become dark and swarthy. It was impossible to recognize his appearance. Gentian stared sharply at the person before him. He coldly snorted and said in a deep voice, "Luo Jian, I didn't think I'd meet you here." Hearing this, the young man was slightly surprised. The voice actually gave him a familiar feeling. He then carefully studied Gentian. Although it was currently night, he was still able to clearly see Gentian's appearance at such a close distance with the help of the bright moonlight in the sky. However, after 3 days of fighting in the forest and without a clear source of water, everyone's face was completely dark. It was impossible to recognize each other's appearance. However, when Changyang Hu was not far from Gentian, heard Gentian's voice, he was stunned at first. Then he looked at Gentian in disbelief and cried out, Your fourth brother!" Changyang Hu's voice was filled with surprise and disbelief. He could not be more familiar with Gentian's tone. A sliver of understanding appeared on Luo Jian's face when he heard that. He sneered, "No wonder I found your voice rather familiar. So you're Changyang Shangtian. I never thought that you'd become a saint as well. You've really surprised me." A vicious light flashed through Luo Jian's eyes when he reached the end of his sentence. Chapter 45. All right then. Be careful, brother. Luo Jian has already reached mid-saint. With that, Changyang Hu immediately went to support the others. Although he was very surprised that Gentian had appeared in the third zone, Changyang Hu understood that this was not the time to get to the bottom of things. With the addition of Gentian and Tai Ta, Changyang Hu and the others who had originally been at a disadvantage were now on par with their opponents. And because of Tai Ta's existence, they even gained a slight advantage. The battle had reached a stalemate, and no one could gain the upper hand in a short period of time. Gentian smiled faintly as he looked at the dark-faced Luo Jian. "Luo Jian, looks like not only will your robbery fail today, the monster cores you're clamoring for will probably change owners." Luo Jian became furious when he heard that. A sharp light flashed through his eyes as he growled, "Changyang Shoten, you don't have the right to take away our monster cores." Gentian looked at Luo Jian with a sliver of disdain. He said indifferently, "Then let's try. Let's see if I have the ability to take away your monster cores." With that, Gentian did not waste any more words. With a sway of his body, he charged toward Luo Jian as quickly as he could. Using the cover of the night, the metal rod in his hand stabbed toward Luo Jian's chest like a venomous snake. A sliver of hidden killing intent flashed through Luo Jian's eyes. His huge sword suddenly flickered with azure light as he swung it toward Gentian with an unstoppable force. Since Luo Jian possessed wind-attributed saint force and had reached mid-saint, he was much faster than the others. His attack was extremely fast, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Jian Chen's expression remained the same as he stared at the huge sword that was heading towards him. He then shifted his body slightly, dodging the huge sword by a hair's breadth. The iron rod in his hand did not change its trajectory, directly stabbing towards Luo Jian's chest. Luo Jian's expression changed slightly. Gentian's attack was extremely fast. At this critical moment, he did not have time to pull back his sword to block. However, his reaction was not slow either. He had already mobilized all of his wind-attributed saint force and controlled his body to rapidly retreat. At the same time, he did his best to pull back his sword. Luo Jian's retreat was extremely fast. When Jianshan's metal rod touched his clothes, Luo Jian had already escaped from Jianshan's attack range. At the same time, he pulled back his sword and gathered Saint Force in his hands. He swung his sword at Jianshan. Luo Jian's attack was extremely simple, but in Jianshan's eyes it was just a random slash without any technique. Even so, Jianshan did not dare to underestimate Luo Jian's attack. Jianshan leaped up and dodged Luo Jian's sword. He then kicked off a nearby tree and leaped toward Luo Jian. With a slight tremble of his arm, Jianshan left behind a faint afterimage as he extended his arm at an extremely fast speed. The metal rod in his hand turned into a streak of black light, stabbing toward Luo Jian with lightning speed. It was impossible to see with the naked eye. Luo Jian only saw a blur before Jianshan's metal rod arrived in front of him. This time, Jianshan's sword was so fast that he did not even have time to react. He did not even have time to dodge. The tip of the metal rod had already stabbed into his chest. Luo Jian's expression suddenly changed. He stared at the metal rod that had already stabbed into his chest in shock. His eyes were filled with disbelief, despair, and fear. With the speed of the rod, he was unable to block it at all. He did not even have the ability to stop it because the rod was just too fast this time. It was so fast that even an intermediate saint with wind-attributed saint force like him could not react in time. If the rod had pierced Luo Jian's chest, he would have been heavily injured, even if he did not die. However, what happened next exceeded everyone's expectations. Just as Jianshan's metal rod stabbed into Luo Jian's chest, it suddenly stopped and a strand of pure saint force surged into Luo Jian's body. Afterward, Jianshan pulled out the rod and somersaulted in the air to reduce the force of the charge. He flew over Luo Jian's head and landed firmly on the ground. The strand of pure saint force he had left in Luo Jian's body suddenly exploded as soon as the rod left Luo Jian's body. The ripples of energy wreaked havoc in Luo Jian's body, destroying his organs. Spurt! Luo Jian immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. The intense pain coming from his body made him, who rarely experienced such a feeling, involuntarily let out a miserable scream. He fell to the ground and rolled around in pain without caring about his image. Luo Jian's miserable cries were exceptionally miserable, immediately attracting the attention of everyone who was fighting. However, when their gazes landed on Luo Jian, who was rolling around in pain on the ground, apart from Tai Ta, everyone could not help but be stunned. From their eyes, there was still a sliver of deep shock, but there was even more disbelief. After dealing with Luo Jian, Jianshan did not plan on letting the group of people go. He charged into the circle with his rod. If he had not coincidentally encountered Changyang, who today, not only would all the monster cores in Changyang whose hands have ended up in their hands, he would probably have been heavily injured as well. With the addition of Jianshan, the originally equal strength between the two sides was immediately broken. Although Jianshan's saint force was not as strong as everyone else's, his battle prowess was undoubtedly the strongest among them. In his previous life, Jianshan had become famous in the Jianghu with his unbreakable sword skills. Moreover, his sword skills had reached perfection, making it impossible for people to guard against. Therefore, his attacks were extremely fast, sometimes so fast that it was unimaginable. It was impossible for people to catch him with their eyes. Although Jianshan was currently using an iron rod and was unable to display his true strength, it was still not something these inexperienced students could compare with. Under his exquisite sword skills, the battle quickly ended. Until the end of the battle, no one had discovered that Jianshan was not using a saint weapon, but only an iron rod. After the battle, the few students who had snatched the monster cores were all lying on the ground with wounds on their bodies. There was a bloody hole in each of their bodies, and they looked at Jianshan with fear in their eyes. Looking at the 8 youths lying on the ground, although Changyang, Hu, and the other 3 suffered injuries of varying degrees, their eyes revealed a victorious smile. The 3 youths who were with Changyang Hu looked at Jianshan with admiration and gratitude. Changyang Hu, I didn't expect you to have such a powerful fourth brother. You really surprised us. Yeah, Changyang-hu. Although I've heard that your fourth brother's strength is not bad, I didn't expect him to be so powerful. Even Luo Jian, a mid-level saint, was defeated by him. Speaking of which, it's all thanks to your fourth brother's help this time. Otherwise, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to keep the monster cores in our hands. The three youths were clearly on good terms with Changyang-hu, and they all sighed with joy. At this moment, Jianqin came to Changyang-hu's side and glanced at the wounds on his body. He asked with concern, "Brother, are your injuries serious?" Hearing this, Changyang-hu shook his head indifferently. He was pleasantly surprised and looked at Jianqin happily. It's fine, it's fine. These are just some minor injuries. Don't forget that my saint force is of the earth attribute. My defense is much stronger than ordinary people's. Changyang-hu paused and asked, "By the way, fourth brother, why did you come to the third zone? I remember that you weren't a saint before we entered the forest. Also, when did you become so powerful that you could defeat Luo Jian?" Changyang-hu asked curiously. Jianqin smiled. "Brother, I'll tell you about these things when we have time. Right now, let's deal with the matter at hand." Jianqin glanced at the students lying on the ground. "Brother, how do you plan on punishing these people?" Changyang-hu thought for a moment. "Fourth brother, I'll leave it to you. If it weren't for you, all of our monster cores would have fallen into their hands." Jianqin smiled meaningfully. "Since that's the case, why should we be polite to them? Let's just plunder all the monster cores in their space belts." Jianqin's suggestion received everyone's approval. Afterwards, Changyang-hu and the other three took off all the space belts under the resentful and angry gazes of Luo Jian's group before plundering all the monster cores inside. After a round of counting, the 8 of them had placed over 130 monster cores in their space belts. Even Jianqin was surprised by this number. Changyang-hu exclaimed, "I didn't expect them to have so many monster cores. It seems like they must have robbed a lot of people before. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for them to kill so many magical beasts in 3 days with their strength." Jianqin nodded in agreement. "Brother, let's divide these monster cores into 6 parts. We'll each have 1. That won't do." As soon as Jianqin finished speaking, a young man stood up and said, "Changyang Shoten, it's all thanks to you and this brother that we were able to obtain these monster cores. We didn't contribute much, so you should keep these monster cores yourselves. Don't share them with us." The young man's words were quickly approved by the other 2. Immediately another person said, "Oz is right. Changyang Shoten, if it weren't for you and this brother, we wouldn't have been able to keep our own monster cores, let alone defeat them. Now that we can protect our own monster cores from falling into their hands, we feel very satisfied. As for these monster cores, we won't take them." "That's right. Changyang Shoten, it's all thanks to you and this brother that we were able to obtain so many monster cores. How can we have the nerve to share them?" Jianqin's eyes flashed with a bright light. His gaze was fixed on the expressions of the 3 people. However, he could only see sincerity in their eyes. There wasn't the slightest hint of falsehood in them. Jianqin saw the expressions of the 3 people, and it made Jianqin's impression of them a lot better. However, Jianqin couldn't help but admire his brother, Changyang-hu. He didn't expect him to be able to make friends with these 3 straightforward characters. Although Changyang-hu looked a little silly, the attentive Jianqin understood that Changyang-hu wasn't stupid. Chapter 46. Haha, fourth brother is right. All of us have contributed to this matter. Now, let's do it according to fourth brother's method. Fourth brother and this brother will take half of these magic cores. The other half will be divided equally among us. Changyang-hu laughed. Jianqin was his younger brother. Even though they had the same father but different mothers, this did not affect their relationship at all. He would not be polite to Jianqin. Since Changyang-hu had said so, the other 3 could not refuse. They all accepted the monster cores excitedly. On average, the 4 of them each received a dozen monster cores, which made them very happy. This amount was equivalent to what they had obtained from hunting magical beasts in the past 3 days. Genshin and the others did not plan to stay any longer. After changing positions, they started a new fire and continued to roast the meat. The 6 of them sat in a circle around the fire. Changyang, who smiled, "Brother, let me introduce you. These 3 are my best friends. They're Oz, Oba, and Dyer." Changyang, who pointed at the 3 of them and said, "Brother, Oz and Oba are twins. They look exactly the same. Once they wash the dirt off their faces, you won't be able to tell who's Oz and who's Oba." Genshin smiled faintly as he greeted the 3 of them one by one. After chatting for a while, they gradually became familiar with each other. They even knew Tai Ta's name. At this moment, Changyang, who became serious, and said, "Brother, I remember that you weren't a saint before we entered the forest. How did you appear in the 3rd zone now? And you're so powerful. You actually defeated Luo Jian, an intermediate saint with wind attribute saint force. Could it be that you've become a saint in the past 3 days?" Changyang, whose question was also what the other 3 were concerned about. As soon as they heard Changyang, whose question, Dyer and Oba immediately focused their attention on Genshin. Genshin defeating Luo Jian was undoubtedly a huge shock to them, although they had heard about Genshin's extraordinary strength in the academy. It was far from exaggerated to such an extent. Genshin smiled and handed the iron rod in his hand to Changyang, who, "Brother, take a look. If I become a saint, would I still need to use a weapon like this?" Changyang, who took the iron rod. With just one look, he could tell that it was a rusty iron rod that had been dyed black with blood. This. Changyang, whose eyes widened as he stared at the rusty iron rod in disbelief. He was so shocked that he could not speak. He never would have thought that Genshin could defeat Luo Jian with a rusty iron rod. If it had not happened right before his eyes, he would not have believed it even if he was beaten to death. At this moment, Dyer and Oba also looked at the iron rod in Changyang, whose hand. After sizing it up, the 3 of them were also filled with disbelief and shock. They looked at Genshin as if they were looking at a monster. Looking at their expressions, Genshin chuckled and said, "With me and Tai Ta working together, the magical beasts in the 2nd region are no longer a challenge to us. That's why Tai Ta and I came to the 3rd region." Hearing this, Changyang, who and the other 3 could not help but feel speechless. The magical beasts in the 2nd region were 1st-rank magical beasts. Although they were relatively weak and did not have strong attack power, it was still very difficult for an ordinary saint to deal with them. However, Genshin and Dyer had obviously not become saints yet, but they dared to say that the magical beasts in the 2nd region were no longer a challenge to them. This made the 4, including Changyang, who cursed Genshin and Dyer in their hearts. After a while, Changyang, who and the others finally returned to their senses. Changyang, who continued to ask, "4th brother, you're already so powerful before becoming a saint. I really don't know how powerful you'll become once you become a saint." Changyang, who paused before continuing, "By the way, 4th brother, when do you think you'll become a saint?" Genshin pondered for a moment before replying, "I've already reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. Once I leave the forest, I plan to break through to the Saint Realm." Changyang, who gasped. He looked at Genshin with surprise and shock. "4th brother, you're really too powerful. When you came to the academy a few months ago, you were only at 80% of Saint Force. I never thought that you'd reach the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force so quickly." Hearing this, the 3 of them could not help but sigh in amazement. The way they looked at Genshin had completely changed. Genshin's cultivation speed was so fast, and his strength was so unbelievably powerful. He was definitely a genius among geniuses. At this moment, the 3 of them had already decided that they had to be on good terms with Genshin in the future. They definitely could not offend him. Jianchen smiled carelessly and said, "Big brother, I've noticed that there seem to be many people fighting over monster cores in the third region. What's going on?" Hearing this, Changyang sighed. "I don't know who started this, but it said that on the second day, a group of people started stealing monster cores from other people in the third region by relying on their numbers. The stealing of monster cores in the third region was also caused by them. When this matter spread, all the students in the third region followed suit. They formed groups and began stealing monster cores. After all, not only are there not many Class 2 magical beasts, they're also extremely difficult to kill. Killing them only gives you a single monster core. Stealing monster cores is much easier than killing them, and if you're lucky, you can even steal multiple monster cores at once. So, now that things have developed to this point, all the students in the third district are fighting each other. Many of the students who are left behind, or those who are in small groups, are unable to protect the magic cores that they have painstakingly hunted for and have been snatched away by others. As a result, many of the injured students have left the forest in advance, and there are not many people left in the third district now. Don't the teachers hiding in the shadows just ignore it? Tai Ta could not help but ask. As long as it doesn't harm lives, or if we encounter a magical beast, the teachers hiding in the shadows won't appear. After all, the reason why we've been called to the forest to hunt magical beasts is actually a form of training for us. At the same time, the stealing of monster cores this time is a test of our strength and unity. After all, things like this happen everywhere on the continent. We're just experiencing it early, said one of the Oba brothers. Oh. Tai Ta came to a realization. Jianchen suddenly smiled strangely. He looked at Changyang, whose group of 4, and said, "Since others can steal from us, why can't we take the initiative to steal from them? I wonder if you're willing to go all out." The eyes of Changyang, whose group of 4, lit up when they heard Jianchen's words. "All right, let's do it. Changyang Shoten, I'll follow you." Dieria immediately stood up and stared at Changyang Shangtian in excitement as he spoke in a heroic manner. "That's right. We weren't strong enough before, so we could only run away. But now that Changyang Shoten has joined us, even if we encounter a team with a mid-level saint, it's not impossible for us to win. Since that's the case, let's take advantage of this last night and do a good job." The Oba brothers were also in high spirits. "All right, 4th brother, I'll listen to you." Changyang, who also expressed his opinion excitedly. As for Tai Ta, he had no objections. These days, Tai Ta had already followed Jianchen's decision. After that, everyone ate their fill. After some discussion, they decided to let the Oba brothers search for targets in the surroundings, while Jianchen's group of 4 stayed behind to wait for news. Bama and his 2 brothers came back very quickly. At the same time, they found a group of 5 people about 5 miles away. Jianchen's group immediately set off. Under the leadership of the Oba brothers, they advanced toward the target 5 miles away. When Jianchen's group arrived at the location, the 5 people had just filled in the blanks and were preparing to rest. They were caught off guard by Jianchen's group. Because the 5 of them were at the beginner saint level, they were quickly defeated by Jianchen's group. However, there weren't many magic cores looted from them. There were only 20 or so magic cores. After taking the magic cores, Jianchen's group didn't make things difficult for them and immediately left. For the whole night, Jianchen's group didn't sleep. They were all looking for their target in the forest. There weren't many people left in the third area. After half a night, Jianchen's group only found 3 groups of people. However, what made them laugh was that there was a group of people who had the same goal as them. They met halfway and started fighting without saying anything. There were 6 people in this group, the same number as Jianchen's group. Moreover, there were 2 intermediate saints among them. They were very powerful. However, the 2 intermediate saints were blocked by Jianchen and Tai Ta. In the end, they were injured by Jianchen's group and obtained the final victory. From this group of people, Jianchen's group collected more than 150 magic cores. It seemed that many students' magic cores had been snatched away by the 6 of them. After going through 3 battles, apart from Jianchen, everyone was covered in wounds. Apart from Taita, who had thick skin, they couldn't continue fighting. Helpless, they could only find a secret place to pass the rest of the night peacefully. Although Jianchen and Taita were still unsatisfied and wanted to rob a few more people, Changyang, whose group of 4 couldn't fight anymore. At this moment, the 2 of them had to stay behind to protect them and prevent any unexpected situations. However, it had to be said that Jianchen's group had a bountiful harvest. Apart from the first group of people who only had around 20 magic cores, the other 2 groups had obtained around 70 and 150 magic cores, respectively. In total, there were close to 260 magic cores. Looking at so many magic cores, Jianchen even suspected that the number of magic cores they had was already half of the total number of magic cores the students had killed in the 3rd area. The rest of the night passed peacefully. At dawn the next day, Jianchen's group set off for the outskirts of the forest. Changyang, whose group's wounds had already begun to slowly heal after applying some ointment. These ointment had been prepared by themselves when they received the space belts from the academy. Chapter 47. P.S. There was a sudden power outage at home, so I couldn't update last night. Please forgive me, but I'll update it today. Jianchen's group of 6 walked towards the outskirts of the forest unhurriedly. 3 days had already passed. If they could successfully protect these monster cores and walk out of the forest, then they would have completed their mission perfectly. Moreover, these monster cores would not be taken back by the academy. They would completely belong to them. Jianchen and the others were very cautious as they walked. This was the time when things could easily happen. Furthermore, after the battles last night, apart from him and Taita, who still maintained their fighting strength, Changyang, Hu, and the others were all injured. They could not even use half of their usual strength. If they were attacked by someone powerful, then a fierce battle would be unavoidable. This was something that Jianchen did not want to see. Jianshan walked in front, with Taita at the back. The group moved forward in a straight line. The faint white barrier in the sky rippled from time to time, quickly spreading in the same direction. When the sun had just risen today, the barrier in the sky that enveloped the entire forest had undergone such a change, pointing out the exit for the students who had lost their way in the forest. Jianchen's mind was on high alert as he constantly paid attention to his surroundings. The 3rd zone was not as peaceful as the 2nd zone. Here, not only did they have to be on guard against the magical beasts that could appear at any time, they also had to be on guard against the students. Perhaps there were people waiting for them in some hidden bushes. Furthermore, the closer they were to the exit, the greater the danger factor. After all, the barrier in the sky had already pointed out the direction of the exit, and the students who were still in the forest were all moving in the same direction. This undoubtedly provided some convenience for the people waiting for them. A few hours later, Jianchen and Taita were getting closer and closer to the exit of the 3rd zone. The journey seemed rather peaceful, but they would come across the corpse of a magical beast every once in a while. In some places, there were even 2 or 3 magical beast corpses at the same time. After a few more hours of traveling, the group finally arrived at the exit of the 3rd zone. They passed through the barrier very smoothly and arrived in the 2nd zone. At this moment, everyone could not help but let out a sigh of relief. They all understood that the demon cores they were shouting about were safe. This was because once they left the 3rd zone, regardless of whether or not they collected the 2 demon cores, the mission was considered to be over. There was simply no one who dared to try and steal anything here. Hee, I never thought the journey would be so peaceful. That's really beyond my expectations. Changyang, who smiled happily, his voice was tinged with excitement. Oba also happily said, "Yeah, I thought we'd be attacked on the way out. I never thought it would be so peaceful. That's really beyond my expectations." Daira reached out and touched the space belt on his waist. He smiled and said, I reckon that the people who stole the monster cores in the third zone have all suffered some injuries. They don't have the energy to rob people on the way. Moreover, most of them are in the same situation as us. They only want to protect themselves. They're satisfied as long as they can leave the third zone safely. They don't have the energy to rob people on the way. Yeah, that's right. It makes sense. Tai-Ta nodded in agreement. Jianchen shook his head slightly and said, "It's not like what you think. In fact, there are still people lying in ambush along the way. It's just that you haven't noticed them. Those people lying in ambush might have seen that we have a large number of people and couldn't estimate our strength. They weren't sure if they could take us down, so they didn't make a move on us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to leave the third zone so safely." When they heard this, their expressions changed slightly. Changyang, who let out a long sigh, he said, "Fortunately, fourth brother told us to pretend that we were fine. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so lucky if those people knew that we were all injured." Oba and the other two nodded in agreement. They looked at Jianchen with a trace of admiration. "All right, let's hurry up and get out of here. Once we get back to the academy, you should recuperate well." The 6 of them continued to make their way to the first zone. As they got closer to the exit of the first zone, the number of academies in the surroundings gradually increased. Although there were definitely many people who gave up on the mission along the way, there were still over 1,000 people who entered the forest this time. Even if more than half of them gave up on the mission, there were still a few hundred people left. With just a few hundred people scattered across the vast forest, it was almost impossible for them to run into each other. As a result, not many people were able to meet in the forest. Jianchen looked around at the other academies who were making their way to the first zone like him. He noticed that most of the male students were half naked and covered in wounds. However, without exception, all of them were in a sorry state. Their upper bodies were covered in mud, and it was impossible to distinguish their appearances from their unkempt faces. Only some of the girls were still wearing their school uniforms, but without exception, their school uniforms were dirty and full of cracks. They looked worse than beggars' clothes. Some of the places where the clothes didn't cover their bodies were covered by wide leaves. They looked extremely miserable. Among them, there were a few who were unable to walk due to the injuries on their legs. They were being supported by their companions as they made their way out of the forest step by step. Perhaps due to the large number of people in this area, there were no magical beasts coming in and out. It was relatively safe along the way. Soon, Jianchen's group passed through the first zone according to the direction indicated by the enchantment in the sky and finally walked out of the forest. Outside the enchantment, Vice President Bayan was wearing a white robe. He was standing there with his back straight. One step behind him, there were a few indifferent-looking academy teachers. Behind them, there was a large group of Kargath Academy students. The total number of students was close to 1,000. They were divided into 2 camps. The number of people in the right camp was several times more than the other camp. Although some of them were wearing school uniforms that were covered in mud, there were very few damaged areas. Overall, they seemed to be in good condition. The other group was in a more sorry state. Their school uniforms were tattered and stained with blood. Through the cracks on their school uniforms, one could vaguely see the scars on their bodies. The people in the left camp were only about 200 people. Without exception, all of them were in a sorry state. Most of them were wearing clothes made of tree bark or animal skin. Among them, there were quite a number of people who were half naked. However, at this moment, everyone who walked out of the forest was arranged by a teacher to gather with the people in the left camp. Afterwards, Jianchen's group sat on the grass and waited quietly. At this moment, he understood that the people in the left camp were all people who stayed in the forest for 3 days and only came out today. As for the people in the right camp, they were all people who left the forest within 3 days. According to the Academy's rules, regardless of whether they obtained 2 magic cores or not, the mission was considered a failure. Looking around, Jianchen discovered that the people in the same camp as him had a gloomy expression. There were also some people who were looking at others with deep anger in their eyes. It was as if their eyes were about to spit out flames. At this moment, Jianqin seemed to have sensed something. He looked back slightly and saw a person with a dark face wearing animal skin and being supported by two students who were dressed the same as him. The person was looking at him with a venomous gaze. His eyes were filled with raging anger and a strong killing intent. Jianqin looked the person up and down, and then a faint sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. He had already recognized that person. It was Luo Jian, although Jianqin knew that he had completely offended Luo Jian after what happened last night. Jianqin did not care about it. In terms of strength, he was not inferior to Luo Jian at all. Once he condensed a holy weapon and advanced to the Saint Realm, Luo Jian would be even less of a threat to him. In terms of family power, although Jianqin was not clear about the strength of Changyang Prefecture from all aspects, the strength of Changyang Prefecture was obviously not weak. Although Luo Jian was the son of the head of the Luo family, a powerful force in the Forbidden City, in Jianqin's view, the Luo family would not come out to embarrass him for such a trivial matter. After all, Luo Jian was injured by him when he accepted the mission of the academy. And at that time, Luo Jian attacked his elder brother and others first. Later, when all the people in the forest came out, the number of people in Jianqin's camp had increased to 300 or 400 people. At this time, Vice Principal by N came to the front of the crowd. His eyes swept over the group of students on the left who were in a sorry state. A smile appeared on his face as he said in a loud voice, "Very good. You really didn't disappoint me. I didn't expect that in this year's magical beast hunt, there would be more people who could stay in the forest for 3 days. Now, everyone maintained the current formation and set off towards the academy." Later, the whole team maintained 2 camps and moved quickly in the direction of the academy. When they passed by a small river, they washed their faces and continued to move forward. Soon, when they arrived at the academy, they found that a high platform had been built in the center of the playground from afar. They stopped in front of the high platform, and then Vice President by N and several teachers went straight to the high platform. The vice president sat in the main seat and said in a flat tone, "The triennial magical beasts hunting competition is now over. According to the rules of the academy, the prizes will be distributed immediately after the completion of the task. Now, students who have stayed in the forest for 3 days and have more than 2 magic cores, please come out." As soon as the vice president finished speaking, more than 100 people came out of the crowd. "Now, let's first count the first-level magic cores. Students who have hunted first-level magical beasts, please come to the stage and count the number," the vice president continued. Chapter 48. Among the 100 or so people, most of them were at the saint level and were active in the second region. When the people who paid the magic cores walked out, there were only 30 or so people left. This made the students who didn't know the situation in the third region feel very puzzled. Although the third region was full of magic beasts, they had low attack power. For a saint-level expert who had condensed a saint weapon, it might be impossible for them to deal with a magic beast alone. But as long as a few people worked together, it wouldn't be too difficult to hunt a magic beast in the third region. It was definitely easier than killing a magic beast for a saint-level expert who hadn't reached the saint level. After all, a saint-level expert saint weapon was very powerful and was far superior to those ordinary weapons. Logically speaking, the students in the third region should have a much higher chance of completing the mission than those in the second region. However, the result was actually like this. In the third region, only 30 or so people completed the mission. When the first student came in front of the teacher who paid the magic cores, he directly took out all the magic cores from his space belt and gently placed them on the table. This student only took out 3 magic cores. His gaze casually swept over the 3 rank 1 monster cores. The teacher in charge of the assessment, who was around 50 years old, nodded his head slightly and said, "Yes, not bad. You pass. What's your name?" "Teacher, I'm called Cheng Yinfeng." The youth who paid the magic cores was very happy. Not bad. Already proved that the teacher was praising him. To be able to receive a teacher's praise was a great honor for him. The teacher picked up a pen and made a note on a piece of paper. Then he said, "Return the spatial belt to the academy and take your magic core. This is your badge of honor. You must keep it carefully." With that, the teacher took out a badge from under the table and handed it to the student. The student answered happily and carefully held the badge of honor with both hands. Then he walked down the stage with a heart full of excitement. Next. Subsequently, one after another, the students took the magic cores in their hands to the old man to be appraised. At the same time, it could be considered as making a record. The speed of the appraisal was very fast. In the blink of an eye, dozens of people had already passed. Among them, the person who obtained the least magic cores only had 2. The person who obtained the most magic cores even took out 8 rank 1 magic cores. This made the old man who was doing the appraisal a little surprised. At this moment, it was the turn of a handsome young man with an extraordinary aura to appraise the magic cores. The young man had a small scar on his forehead. It seemed that he had been injured not long ago in the forest. There was a trace of blood on the edge of the scar. The young man calmly walked in front of the old man and silently took off the space belt on his waist. Then the magic cores were taken out one by the young man and placed on the table one by one. As the magic cores were taken out by the young man from the space belt, a total of 6 magic cores were placed on the table. However, the young man's actions didn't stop because of this. He continued to take out the magic cores one by one from the space belt in an unhurried manner. His expression was also very indifferent. It could be seen that this young man was a very steady person. When the young man took out 6 magic cores, the teacher in charge of the appraisal finally became spirited. A faint smile appeared on his old face, and he nodded slightly. There was a trace of admiration in his eyes when he looked at the young man. Soon, the young man had taken out 10 magic cores from the space belt. At this moment, the expression of the old man in charge of the appraisal finally changed. He looked at the young man not with admiration, but with astonishment. It was definitely not an easy task for a person who wasn't even a saint to obtain 10 magic cores in a forest full of magic beasts. Furthermore, he didn't stop, which undoubtedly told everyone that he hadn't taken out all the magic cores in his space belt. Behind the young man, the students behind him were all stunned by the number of magic cores he took out. Thinking about how they had spent a lot of effort in the forest to obtain only 2 or 3 magic cores, this was already a very good result for them. Many of them even felt proud because of this. However, the number of magic cores the young man took out in one go was several times what they had obtained in 3 days. How could this not shock them? Having dealt with magic beasts many times, they deeply understood how difficult it was for them to kill magic beasts with their strength that wasn't even a saint. The young man didn't care about everyone's expressions, as if he didn't see them at all. His hands didn't stop moving as he continued to take out magic cores one after another from his space belt. Soon, there were 15 magic cores on the table, but the young man still didn't show any signs of stopping. His movements were still as calm as ever as he took out the magic cores from his space belt one by one with a very calm expression. At this time, all the teachers on the high platform were looking at the young man. Their faces were full of surprise and disbelief. He had killed more than 10 magical beasts in 3 days with the strength of a saint. If 5 or 6 people worked together, they might be able to do it. But if one person wanted to kill so many magical beasts in 3 days, it was simply impossible in the eyes of all the teachers, unless those magical beasts were seriously injured. Vice Principal by N faintly smiled as he sat on the platform. His name seems to be Mu Tian. He only joined the academy last year, and he's gone from the 8th layer of Saint Force to the peak of the 10th layer in just a year. That's quite impressive. It's even said that he tried to break through to Saint Force before. Although he failed in the end, I have to say that the Mu family has produced a good seedling this time. Vice Principal by N paused before looking at Changyang Shoten and Tai Ta. He softly murmured, I really look forward to what Changyang Shoten and Tai Ta have obtained. It's said that the two of them actually went to the third zone to hunt Class 2 magic beasts on the last day. They're clearly not even saints, yet they were able to kill Class 2 magic beasts with just 2 metal weapons. Oh, heavens, that's just unbelievable. If I hadn't seen them kill a perfectly fine Class 2 magic beast with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it at all. Looks like not only has the principal taken in a good disciple this time, but even the Changyang Prefecture that has been silent for over 100 years will return to its former glory in the near future because of Changyang Shoten. When the young man took out a total of 23 Class 1 monster cores from his spatial belt, he finally stopped. He calmly looked at the old man in charge of the assessment and said, Teacher, these are the monster cores I hunted. The old man glanced past the 23 magic cores and let out a long sigh. He looked at the young man in interest and asked, What's your name? Mu Tian, the young man replied in an extremely indifferent tone. The old man's gaze gradually sharpened as he asked, Mu Tian, did you obtain all these magic cores by yourself, or did you obtain them by hunting magic beasts with several people? Mu Tian's expression did not change at all. He had already expected this. He said, Teacher, I obtained all these magic cores by myself. The old man's gaze towards Mu Tian immediately changed with that. He glanced deeply at Mu Tian, and his eyes were filled with admiration. Afterwards, he nodded with a smile. Good, good, good. Mu Tian, right? Very good. Your results are extremely outstanding. I hope you can continue to work hard in the future. The old man did not ask Mu Tian how he had obtained the monster cores. That was not important at all. What was important was that Mu Tian had worked hard to obtain them. After all, strength was everything on the Tianyuan continent. As long as he could emerge victorious in the end, no one would say anything even if he used underhanded methods. Mu Tian could not help but smile faintly when he heard the old man's words of praise. At this moment, the old man took out a sky-blue belt and a badge. He passed them to Mu Tian and said, Mu Tian, this is the space belt and the badge that you kept here before. Take care of them. Mu Tian calmly received the spatial belt and the badge of honor. After storing the 20 over grade 1 monster cores into his own spatial belt, he walked off the stage. From the beginning to the end, Mu Tian's face did not reveal the slightest bit of pride or complacency. He had been calm the entire time. Genshin's gaze followed Mu Tian until he walked off the platform. He had already committed Mu Tian's name to memory. His intuition told him that Mu Tian was anything but simple, and he was no ordinary person either. He would definitely achieve great things in the future. However, he did not know which path Mu Tian would take. Due to the matter of Mu Tian taking out over 20 magic cores at once, the magic cores taken out by the following students did not cause any more waves. Most of them took out at least 2 magic cores, and only a small portion took out more than 2. Other than Mu Tian, who obtained 23 magic cores, the others only obtained 8 magic cores at most. The speed of the examination was very fast. Very soon, it was Jinshin's turn. At this moment, the eyes of the vice principal and a few teachers immediately lit up. They stared at Jinshin closely, showing a very attentive expression. The vice principal, by N, who was originally reclining on the chair, also sat up straight. His eyes carried a trace of expectation. Although he knew that Jinshin had killed quite a few magic beasts in the forest, he did not know what quite a few meant. Jinshin calmly walked in front of the old man in charge of inspecting the monster cores. He lowered his head slightly to look at the table that was about 2 meters long and revealed a troubled expression. After a moment of hesitation, he opened his mouth and said, Teacher, is it possible to change to a bigger table? Hearing Genshin's words, the old man who was in charge of the examination was slightly stunned. He did not seem to understand What did you just say? Jianchen revealed a trace of helplessness as he looked at the table that was not big to begin with. This was because the table was just too small. It could not fit all the magic cores that had almost filled up his space belt. Chapter 49. After hearing Jianchen's words, the students behind Jianchen, with the exception of Tower, all showed a trace of surprise. They looked at Jianchen with strange gazes, and even more people doubted their ears. In their opinion, if you want to hand over the magic nuclei, then hand over the magic nuclei. Why do you have to care about the size of the teacher's desk? Isn't this just looking for trouble? Who is that person? He really doesn't know what's good for him. He actually dares to ask the teacher to change his desk. What an idiot. He actually dares to say that Teacher Steve's desk is too small in front of so many people. What's even more inconceivable is that he dares to ask Teacher Steve to change his desk. Heavens, he actually dares to talk about Teacher Steve's desk. Doesn't he know that Teacher Steve is the strictest teacher in our Kargath Academy? Many people began to point and discuss Jianchen. They looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. The expression of the old man in charge of the examination changed slightly. He frowned slightly and stared at Jianchen with a sharp gaze. He coldly snorted and said in a deep voice, "What's your name? How dare you talk about our teacher's head? This desk was prepared long ago. How can you change it just because you say so?" Not only did Jianchen's words make the teacher in charge of the examination angry, even the other teachers in charge of the examination couldn't help but frown. They looked at Jianchen with displeasure. Jianchen's words were completely disrespectful to them as teachers. Among them, none of them thought that Jianchen's reason for changing his desk was because this desk simply couldn't fit all the magic nuclei in his space belt. Of course, there were a few teachers who were the exception. Their expressions were very calm, and only a faint smile hung on their faces. They were the ones who saw Jianchen and Tower kill a pack of green wolf kings in the second area. At this moment, a very beautiful girl in the back of the line stared suspiciously at Jianchen's figure with a pair of bright eyes. She frowned slightly and muttered in a low voice, "Strange. Why do I feel that his figure is a bit familiar? Have I seen him somewhere before?" The girl's brows were tightly furrowed as she thought hard. Suddenly, the girl's eyes lit up as a familiar figure appeared in her mind. The next moment, joy and surprise immediately filled the girl's eyes. She subconsciously cried out, "Changyang Shoten! He's Changyang Shoten!" The girl didn't conceal her voice at all. So many people heard her. However, after hearing Changyang Shoten's name, the expressions of the surrounding students changed slightly. Some of the students who were cursing Changyang Shoten obediently shut their mouths. Changyang Shoten's name was very famous in Kargath Academy. Almost everyone knew about him. Even so, only a small portion of people had seen Changyang Shoten's true appearance. Most of them were new students. At this moment, although Jianchen had cleaned the dirt on his face, there were still some spots left on it. Moreover, his clothes were tattered, making him look no different than a beggar. If one wasn't familiar with Jianchen's appearance, it was almost impossible to recognize him. That's why no one recognized him, even after he had lined up for so long. When he heard the name Changyang Shoten, the old man in charge of the examination was slightly surprised. He couldn't help but take a good look at Jianchen. Obviously, even the teacher in charge of the examination was familiar with Changyang Shoten's name. Even so, Jianchen still didn't have enough ability to make the teacher change the table according to his request. The old man in charge of the examination opened his mouth slightly. Just as he was about to say something, Vice Dean Bai En, who was sitting at the head of the table, suddenly said, "Someone immediately bring a bigger table here." The Vice Dean had a smile on his face. He didn't show any dissatisfaction because of Jianchen's words. Instead, he looked at Jianchen with some expectation in his eyes. It was as if he had already guessed the reason why Jianchen wanted to change the table. Vice Dean Bai En looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. However, his prestige in Kargath Academy was very high. He was second only to the dean. When he spoke, the teachers immediately became silent. Apart from a few teachers, the rest of the teachers were extremely puzzled by the vice dean's actions. They really couldn't understand why the vice dean would listen to a student and change the table that was originally prepared. After all, the table used by the teacher in charge of the examination was enough to handle the registration of magic cores. There was no need to change to a bigger table. Soon, a 3-meter-long and 2-meter-wide desk was brought up, replacing the original desk used by the teacher in charge of the examination. Changyang Shoten, you should be satisfied now. The teacher in charge of the examination sat in front of the bigger table. His attitude towards Jianqin wasn't very friendly. It was very obvious that Jianqin's request to change the table had left a very bad impression in the heart of this 50 to 60 years old teacher. Feeling the prejudice in the old man's heart, Jianqin couldn't help but reveal a trace of a bitter smile. He didn't expect that because of this matter, a teacher would have a trace of prejudice against him. This matter was completely out of his expectations, but Jianqin didn't care too much about it. Then, Jianqin directly took off his own space belt. He didn't take out the magic cores one by one like the other students. Instead, he directly took out 10 magic cores from the space belt and gently placed them on the table. These magic cores were all pale white and were a size larger than an adult's finger. Seeing Jianqin take out 10 magic cores at once, the old man in charge of the examination was somewhat dissatisfied with Jianqin's behavior, but at this moment he couldn't help but secretly nod his head. However, just when the old man in charge of the examination thought that these were all the magic cores that Jianqin could take out, Jianqin's hand once again reached into the space belt and continued to take out a large number of magic cores. This time, the number of magic cores he took out was also 10. Now, there were 20 magic cores on the table. Seeing these 20 magic cores, the eyes of the old man in charge of the examination suddenly lit up. He looked at Jianqin with a bit of surprise and secretly thought to himself, "This Changyang Shoten really lives up to his reputation. His strength isn't that of a saint, but he can defeat a saint. It seems that he really has some ability." Then, Jianqin continued to reach into the space belt and took out a large number of magic cores again and gently placed them on the table. The hard magic cores collided with the wooden table, making a dong-dong-dong sound. Seeing Jianqin take out another 10 magic cores from his space belt, the expression of the old man in charge of the examination changed slightly. His eyes were filled with shock. This was because Jianqin had already taken out 30 magic cores, 7 more than Mu Tian. A student who hadn't even reached the saint level was able to kill 30 class 1 magical beasts in 3 days. Even this old man, who had seen great storms, couldn't help but feel a trace of shock and disbelief in his heart. Even though the attacks of the magical beasts were relatively weak, they were definitely not easy to kill for students who were at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force at most. Not only did the old man in charge of the examination become shocked by Jianqin's 30 magic cores, even the other teachers behind him felt a little disbelief. Only the few teachers who knew about Jianqin and Vice Principal Bai En continued to smile. As for the students who were still queuing up, they had long been stunned by the 30 monster cores that Jianqin had taken out. Jianqin did not even look at the shocked expressions of the surrounding teachers and students. Under everyone's focused gazes, Jianqin reached into his space belt again and took out another large number of magic cores, placing them gently on the table. He did not stop there. Under the stunned gazes of the teachers and students, he reached his hand into his space belt again and took out another handful of magic cores. As the magic cores were taken out by Jianqin from his space belt one by one, the large table was soon completely filled with magic cores. Although they were all class 1 magic cores, due to the different sizes of the magical beasts, their sizes were different as well. The small ones were only a little bigger than a thumb, while the large ones were the size of a child's fist. At this moment, whether it was the teachers or the students, they were all stunned by the number of magic cores Jianqin had taken out. A person who was obviously not a saint had only spent 3 days in the forest to hunt down over 100 Class 1 magical beasts. No one would believe it if they said this. Now, among the teachers and students present, except for a few people, no one would believe that Jianqin had hunted down these magic cores himself. Everyone thought that these magic cores in Jianqin's hand were pieced together from many other people's magic cores. Perhaps he had even used some underhanded means to obtain them. It was impossible for him to have hunted down magic beasts by himself. Now, among the teachers and students present, except for a few people, no one would believe that Jianqin had hunted down magic beasts by himself. Everyone thought that these magic cores in Jianqin's hand were pieced together from the magic cores of many people. Looking at the 100 Class 1 magic cores that had almost filled the table before him, the old man in charge of the examination took a deep breath. Although he was certain that Jianqin had obtained these magic cores through underhanded means, he could not help but admire Jianqin's ability. As for the underhanded methods, the academy would not interfere. This was the law of survival on the Tianyuan continent. Seeing that Jianqin had actually taken out over 100 Class 1 monster cores, Vice Principal Bayan, who was sitting at the head of the table, revealed a look of disbelief. In his heart, he was extremely clear that there were no cases of students fighting over monster cores in the second area. Thus, there was no doubt that Jianqin had obtained these monster cores through robbing. In that case, there was only one explanation left, and that was that Jianqin had obtained these Class 1 monster cores by relying on his own abilities to hunt down magical beasts. Even with Bayan's mental fortitude, he could not help but feel deeply shocked when he reached this conclusion. At the same time, he felt extremely doubtful. Did Jianqin and Tai Ta not exhaust themselves at all from hunting the magical beasts? Was the saint force in their bodies limitless? They had actually hunted down so many Class 1 magical beasts that were stronger than them in just 3 days. The old man in charge of the examination glanced at Jianqin with mixed feelings before beginning to count the number of magic cores on the table. He did not ask how Jianqin had obtained these magic cores because he had already reached a certain conclusion. Chapter 50. The magic cores were quickly accounted for, and the old man in charge of the assessment said, "There are a total of 98 magic cores here. This is your space belt. Now, return the space belt that belongs to the academy." As he spoke, the old man took out an emerald green space belt and handed it to Jianqin. This space belt was given to him by his father, Changyang Ba, when he left Changyang Prefecture. Jianqin looked at the space belt that belonged to the academy in his hand and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Teacher, I'll keep this space belt that belongs to me for the time being. I'll return it to the academy after this assessment is over." Hearing this, the old man's brows furrowed slightly, and he asked in confusion, "Why?" Perhaps it was because Jianqin had obtained close to 100 magic cores by himself. But the old man's attitude towards Jianqin had clearly changed. "Teacher, I still have Class 2 magic cores in this space belt. I still have to participate in the assessment of Class 2 magic cores later." Jianqin said indifferently, "Right now, the assessment was only for Class 1 magic cores. The Class 2 magic cores would have to wait until the Class 1 magic cores had been assessed." "Oh, what? You still have Class 2 magic cores?" Hearing this, the old man's eyes revealed a trace of disbelief. He looked at Jianqin with eyes full of suspicion. He wasn't the only one. Even the other teachers, sitting on the high platform, had the same expression as him. Jianqin nodded slightly and said, "Yes, teacher." Hearing this, the old man took a deep breath. His gaze towards Jianqin became serious for the first time. At this moment, he realized that he seemed to have underestimated this Changyang Shoten, who had some rumors in the academy. However, he didn't waste his breath on this matter. He waved his hand and said, "All right then, put these magic cores away. You can continue to participate in the second round of assessment." Afterwards, Jianqin placed the 100 magic cores back into his space belt and left the high platform. However, whether it was the teachers on the stage or the surrounding students, their gazes towards Jianqin had completely changed. There was no lack of jealousy, envy, and even disdain in their eyes. After walking down the high platform, Jianqin didn't return to the crowd. Instead, he went to the group of people who were waiting for their Class 2 magic cores to be assessed. Apart from Changyang Hu and a few others, the students who were waiting for their magic cores to be assessed all revealed a trace of surprise and doubt when they saw Jianqin arrive. They hadn't encountered Jianqin in the 3rd region. Clearly, they were very curious about someone who wasn't even a saint yet coming to submit their Class 2 magic cores. They really found it hard to believe that Jianqin dared to enter the 3rd region to hunt Class 2 magical beasts and even obtained at least 2 Class 2 magic cores. Behind Jianqin was Taita. After Jianqin walked down the high platform, Taita also arrived in front of the teacher in charge of the assessment. It was no longer a secret that Taita was the dean of Kargath Academy, so all the teachers in the academy knew Taita. Seeing Taita come up, the old man in charge of the assessment couldn't help but reveal a trace of a smile on his face. He said, "Taita, I wonder what your harvest was this time." Taita chuckled and didn't say anything, imitating Jianqin. He put his hand into his space belt and directly took out a large amount of magic cores and gently placed them on the desk. Because Taita's hand was relatively large, he took out no less than 14 or 15 magic cores. Looking at the 14 or 15 magic cores on the table, the old man in charge of the assessment revealed a trace of a smile on his face. He thought to himself, as expected of the dean, although he looks a bit silly and lacks shrewdness, his talent is really amazing. After taking out 14 or 15 monster cores, Taita's actions did not stop for even a moment. His palm took out the monster cores that were placed in his spatial belt one by one. Gradually, under the astonished gazes of the first-grade teachers and students, more and more monster cores were placed on the table. There were at least 10 of them. Taita finally stopped when he had taken out over 100 magic cores. Looking at all the magic cores he had collected, Taita chuckled in an honest manner. He said happily, "Teacher, these are the magic cores I've collected." At this moment, the surrounding teachers and students were so shocked that they were speechless. Their gazes were filled with disbelief as they stared at the 100 magic cores on the table. The old man in charge of the assessment sucked in a deep breath. He glanced at Taita deeply and slowly said, Good. Taita, you've done well. You haven't embarrassed your master." With that, the old man lowered his head and began to count the magic cores. He did not ask how Taita had obtained them. In his heart, he had already linked Taita's method of obtaining the magic cores to Jianqin. Very soon, the old man finished counting the magic cores. He said, "There are a total of 97 magic cores here." With that, the old man began to record the magic cores on a small notebook. After recording everything, the old man took out a black spatial belt and a badge of honor from under the table. He handed them to Taita and said, "Taita, this is the spatial belt and badge of honor that you've been keeping here. Put away the monster core and return the spatial belt that belongs to the academy." It was obvious with a single glance that this was a high-grade space belt. It had been given to Taita by the headmaster of Kargath Academy after he had become his disciple. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for a commoner like him to wear a high-grade tool like a space belt. Even though space belts were very common on the Tianyuan continent, they were not something commoners could possess. Taita's gaze paused on the black space belt for a while. He shook his head and said, "Teacher, I'll leave this space belt with you for now. I still have Class 2 magic cores." "What? You have Class 2 magic cores as well?" The old man in charge of the assessment was extremely surprised with that. There was some disbelief on his face. A few of the teachers on the platform could not help but look at each other when they heard Taita's words. Disbelief filled their eyes. They had never thought that after Jianqin, there would be a student who was not even a saint who had obtained a Class 2 magic core. The old man in charge of the assessment hesitated slightly before asking, "Taita, have you been to the third zone?" Although the old man's question had exceeded his responsibilities, he could not help but feel extremely curious. Even though he had already guessed a thing or two, he could not be certain without hearing the exact details from Taita. Taita nodded slightly and said in a low, muffled voice, "Yes, I have been to the third zone." The old man continued to ask, "Did you obtain the Class 2 magic cores by hunting magical beasts?" Although the old man's question had exceeded his responsibilities, no one came out to stop him. This was because he wasn't the only one who was extremely curious about this matter. Even the teachers on the high platform were the same. They all wanted to know the exact answer in their hearts. A portion of it was obtained by me and Changyang Shoten. Taita did not hide anything, but he only said half of it. Hearing that, the old man's eyes filled with disbelief. He said in surprise, "What? You're saying that you and Changyang Shoten were able to kill a Class 2 magic beast?" Taita nodded and said yes. This answer caused all the teachers on the platform to be extremely shocked. Most of them felt that it was unbelievable. Two people who were not even saints were actually able to kill a Class 2 magic beast. This was the first time this had happened since the establishment of Kargath Academy. Afterwards, Taita collected his magic cores and walked down the platform. He went to the crowd waiting for the Class 2 magic cores to be assessed and stood behind Jianchen. However, at this moment, Jianchen and Taita had become the most eye-catching people in the crowd. Those who had failed the mission, standing behind them, looked at Jianchen and Taita with jealousy in their eyes. Many of them had been forced to flee miserably from Class 1 magic beasts in the second zone, but they never thought that Jianchen and Taita, who were not much stronger than them, would be able to obtain over 100 Class 1 magic cores in the second zone. They even obtained Class 2 magic cores. This made them feel extremely unbalanced, and many of the older students felt ashamed. Very soon, the assessment of the Class 1 magic cores was completed. Jianchen had obtained the most Class 1 magic cores. He had obtained a total of 98 magic cores, while Taita had obtained one less than Jianchen. The two of them had obtained several times more than Mu Tian, who was ranked third. In the crowd, Mu Tian stared at Jianchen and Taita with a strange light in his eyes. He murmured to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Taita, Changyang Shoten, you really do live up to your reputation. You really are worthy of being able to defeat Saint Realm experts. I really want to find a chance to spar with the two of you." Although Jianchen and Taita had stolen the limelight, Mu Tian did not seem displeased at all. He remained rather calm, as if this was something insignificant to him. It did not affect him at all. At this moment, Changyang, who arrived before Jianchen in excitement, he said softly, "Fourth brother, the two of you are just too much. In the past 3 days, each of you has obtained close to 100 magic cores." Changyang, whose voice was filled with unconcealable excitement, he looked at Jianchen with pride. Jianchen smiled and said nothing. Suddenly, Jianchen's eyes narrowed slightly. As if he had sensed something, he immediately looked back. He saw a young man in tattered clothes looking at him with resentment. The intense killing intent in his eyes was undisguised. The sharpness of his gaze made Jianchen frown involuntarily. However, when Jianchen carefully examined the young man's appearance, he immediately understood. He was Luo Jian, who had all of his magic cores plundered by Jianchen in the forest. At that time, not only had all of Luo Jian's magic cores been taken away by Jianchen's group without leaving a single one behind, he had also been heavily injured. Although he was not very active, he had completely lost the ability to fight. As a result, the group did not have the ability to steal other people's magic cores or hunt magic beasts. As a result, Luo Jian's group had failed their mission this time. A faint smile appeared on Jianqin's face. There was a trace of disdain between his brows. He did not take Luo Jian seriously at all. Jianqin had seen many people like Luo Jian in his previous life. However, there were very few of them who could truly cause great waves. The second round of examination began very quickly. The students who had reached the Saint Realm and completed the mission walked up the platform one by one. However, there were two exceptions. Apart from Jianchen and Tai Ta, who had not reached the Saint Realm, everyone else had reached the Saint Realm. Chapter 51. Very soon, more than 10 people had passed the examination. At this time, it was the turn of a young man with an extraordinary bearing. Although the young man seemed to be in a very sorry state, the arrogance between his brows did not decrease in the slightest. The young man arrived in front of the desk and quickly took out a large pile of monster cores from his spatial belt, placing them on the desk. The old man in charge of the examination clearly recognized the young man. After counting the monster cores on the desk, he said in a rather appreciative tone, "There are a total of 93 monster cores here. Not bad. Cheng Mingxiang, your results are very good." Tai Ta's eyes immediately lit up when he heard Cheng Mingxiang's name. His eyes were filled with battle intent as he looked at Cheng Mingxiang, who was standing in front of the desk. Tai Ta had never forgotten the unfinished battle from last time. At that time, he was not as strong as he was today, especially after 3 days of killing magical beasts in the forest. With some pointers from Jianqin, Tai Ta's battle prowess was much stronger than before. He believed that with his current strength and the little battle experience he had, even if his saint force was inferior to Cheng Mingxiang's, he would definitely not lose with his advantage in terms of strength. Although Tai Ta seemed crude, he also understood that this was not the time to compete with Cheng Mingxiang. As a result, he could only glare at Cheng Mingxiang's back angrily before slowly suppressing his strong desire to fight with Cheng Mingxiang. Hearing the old man's praise, Cheng Mingxiang revealed a smile on his face. A trace of pride appeared in his eyes. The old man in charge of the examination buried his head in his notebook and continued, 93 Class 2 monster cores. If nothing unexpected happens, you'll definitely be in the top 3 for Class 2 monster cores this time. And with your talent for cultivation, your future is limitless. Work hard. Thank you for your praise, Teacher Steve. The old man's words of praise made the pride on Cheng Mingxiang's face become even thicker. Afterwards, Cheng Mingxiang returned the spatial belt that belonged to the academy and received his Medal of Honor before walking off the platform. After Cheng Mingxiang left, another student with the same tattered clothes came to the desk and took out a large pile of magic cores from his spatial belt. The amount wasn't much less than what Cheng Mingxiang had obtained. The old man in charge of the assessment smiled and nodded. His gaze paused on the young man's face for a while before he slowly said, "Not bad, Huangdong. It seems that your harvest this time is also very bountiful." Upon hearing Huangdong's name, many of the students below the high platform cried out in surprise. Jianqin's expression changed slightly, and his eyes immediately fell on the young man. He was no stranger to the name Huangdong. Huangdong was ranked 3rd in the top 10 experts of Kargath College. It was said that his strength had reached the peak of Saint Realm last year and was only 1 step away from Great Saint Realm. Once he successfully broke through to Great Saint Realm, it meant that he could graduate. The top 10 experts of Kargath Academy referred to the 10 strongest students. All of them had reached the peak of Saint Realm and were only 1 step away from Great Saint Realm. Once they reached the Great Saint Realm, they would leave the top 10 experts' range. For the old man's praise, Huangdong just smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Soon, the old man had finished counting the magic cores on the table. Huangdong had obtained a total of 95 magic cores, 2 more than Cheng Mingxiang. After Huangdong left the high platform, several names on the top 10 experts list appeared one after another. Almost all of them had harvested about 9 magic nuclei, and the number one on the top 10 experts list, Bugadier, had harvested 103 magic nuclei. However, among the top 10 experts, only 4 people had completed the task. The other 6 had all been eliminated during the task. They had all encountered people of the same level as themselves. In the case of a huge difference in numbers, they had lost to the other party. Moreover, the magic cores in their hands had all been snatched away. Very quickly, the people who were still in the queue of the top 10 experts had already gone down. The people behind them were people who weren't very famous in the academy, and at this time, the number of magic cores that the people in front of them had turned in first place was the number one of the top 10 experts, Bugadier. Bugadier had turned in 103 magic cores and was in first place. In second place was Jing Mingyue, who was ranked 5th on the top 10 experts list. She was also the only female on the top 10 experts list in Kargath Academy. This time, she had obtained a total of 101 monster cores, 2 less than Bugadier. The third person was Cheng Mingxiang. He had obtained 93 magic cores. Although Cheng Mingxiang was not in the top 10 experts list, his strength had already reached the high-level Saint Realm. Moreover, he was also one of the top experts in the Kargath Academy. Even compared to the top 10 experts list, he was not much weaker. Moreover, Cheng Mingxiang was known as a cultivation genius in the Kargath Academy. Not only was his cultivation speed faster than many people, even his battle strength was not to be underestimated. After the 3 of them left, everyone was certain that the top 3 spots for Class 2 magic cores would belong to none other than the 3 of them, because at this moment, the people in the queue were not very famous in Kargas, and their strength was only at the level of primary saint and intermediate saint. Naturally, they could not be compared to the 3 of them. Changyang Hu and the other 3 had snatched a lot of magic cores with Jianchen. Although the 4 of them had only obtained half of the magic cores on average, each of them had about 30 to 40 magic cores. Although the harvest was not very abundant, it was not bad for their strength. After all, they only had the strength of a primary Saint Realm. Soon, all the students who had reached the Saint Realm had passed the examination. Although some of them had obtained a lot of magic cores, none of them could surpass the top 3. Now, only Jianchen and Taita were left. At this moment, whether it was the teachers on the high platform or the students below, all of their gazes fell on Jianchen and Taita. The 2 of them had not reached the Saint Realm yet, but they were able to kill a Class 2 magical beast. This already made many people feel intense jealousy and unbalanced. At this moment, everyone was guessing how many magic cores the 2 of them had. Of course, no one would compare the magic cores obtained by Jianchen and Taita with those of the seniors. They all thought that the 2 of them definitely did not have too many Class 2 magic cores. Jianchen came in front of the old man in charge of the examination and took off his space belt. At this moment, the old man in charge of the examination looked at Jianchen with a hint of praise in his eyes. The prejudice he had against Jianchen just now had disappeared without a trace. Although he had already determined that Jianchen and Taita definitely did not have more than 10 Class 2 magic cores, the fact that they could enter the 3rd region and kill Class 2 magical beasts when they were not even saints made him have a whole new level of respect for Jianchen and Taita. After all, killing Class 2 magical beasts when they were not even saints was definitely a first in Kargath Academy. At this moment, some of the listless teachers sitting on the high platform couldn't help but perk up. Their eyes were full of spirit as they looked at Jianchen. Jianchen glanced at the teachers sitting around him indifferently. When he discovered that they were looking at him with sparkling eyes, he couldn't help but reveal an imperceptible smile on his indifferent face. Then he directly reached his hand into his space belt and took out a large number of Class 2 magic cores and placed them on the table. There seemed to be a total of 9 of them. When they saw Jianchen taking out those 9 Class 2 magic cores, many teachers on the high platform revealed a trace of surprise and disbelief. Obviously, This number had exceeded the expectations of most of them. After all, there was a huge difference in strength between Class 2 and Class 1 magical beasts. According to their original thoughts, Jianqin having 3 or 4 Class 2 magic cores was already amazing enough. They didn't expect him to have as many as 9 Class 2 magic cores. Then, before they could think of anything else, Jianqin once again took out a large number of Class 2 magic cores from his space belt. Now, there were more than a dozen Class 2 magic cores on the table. This number was enough to match the harvest of some students who had reached the Saint Realm in 3 days. Seeing this scene, all the teachers on the high platform revealed an expression of disbelief. Even the old man in charge of checking the magic cores was shocked speechless by Jianqin taking out more than a dozen Class 2 magic cores. Although there were only a dozen Class 2 magic cores, the impact on the teachers' hearts was even greater than when Jianqin had handed in over 100 Class 1 magic cores in one go. After all, these Class 2 magic cores were taken out by a student who hadn't even reached the Saint Realm. At this moment, all the teachers suddenly realized that if these magic cores were taken from the Class 2 magical beasts that Jianqin had killed with his own hands, then his future achievements. When they thought of how he could kill Class 2 magical beasts with his strength that wasn't even at the Saint Realm, and more than a dozen of them in one go, the teachers felt a wave of disbelief in their hearts. Vice President by N, who was sitting at the head of the table, revealed a gratified smile on his face as he muttered, "Not bad, not bad, not bad at all. I just don't know how many of these Class 2 magic cores were obtained by killing magical beasts with your own strength. After seeing this, I'll have to investigate properly." After taking out the Class 2 magic cores, Jianqin's actions didn't stop because of this. He once again reached into his space belt and took out another handful of Class 2 magic cores. Then, Jianqin didn't stop moving. Under the shocked and disbelieving gazes of all the teachers, he continuously took out Class 2 magic cores of different sizes from his space belt, filling up the entire table. Looking at the pile of Class 2 magic cores on the table, all the teachers on the high platform fell into a daze. Even the sharp-eyed students below the platform who saw the situation on the table had an expression of disbelief on their faces, as if they had seen something inconceivable. The old man in charge of the examination took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the shock in his heart, calming himself down. It wasn't that he hadn't seen these magic cores on the table in his life, and he had seen many magic cores that were of a much higher grade and a much larger number. However, the significance of these Class 2 magic cores couldn't be judged by ordinary means. The old man in charge of the examination looked deeply at Jianqin, then lowered his head to count the magic cores on the table. Very soon, the magic cores were counted, but at this moment the old man's expression was filled with shock and disbelief. His emotions that had just calmed down, once again, surged uncontrollably. He sat in front of the table in a daze, actually unable to open his mouth to report the number of magic cores. After a few breaths, finally, Vice President by N, who was sitting at the head of the table, couldn't help but say, "Steve, what are you waiting for? Quickly report the number of magic cores." Vice President by N's voice was faintly trembling and excited, but his expression was very calm. Chapter 52. As soon as the voice of the old man in charge of the examination fell, everyone immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. Then the whole place became silent in an instant. It was so quiet that even the sound of a needle dropping on the ground could be clearly heard. This number even shocked Vice President by N, who was sitting at the head of the table, to the point that he was speechless. His eyes stared blankly at the large pile of second-rank magic nuclei on the table with a shocked expression on his face. This number had already surpassed Bugadier, who was ranked first in the previous harvest of magic nuclei. After a long time, finally a student couldn't help but shout loudly, "Impossible! This is absolutely impossible. He's not even a saint. How could he harvest so many magic nuclei in the third region? More than a dozen more than Bugadier, who is ranked first in the top 10 experts of the Academy." This is absolutely impossible. He must have brought these magic nuclei in from the outside. A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Following the words of this student, more and more voices of opposition sounded. Jianshin's harvest of nearly 100 first-rank magic nuclei had already made many people jealous and felt very unbalanced. Not to mention, he actually took out another 118 second-rank magic nuclei. In terms of quantity, it was even more than the first-rank magic nuclei. This made all the students of the academy unable to accept. Below the stage, Brigadier, who was currently ranked first in the top 10 experts of Kargath Academy, looked at Jianshin's back with a shocked expression and muttered, "His strength is obviously not even a saint. How could he harvest so many second-rank magic nuclei? Could it be that he really brought all the magic nuclei in his hands in from the outside?" Brigadier couldn't help but have such a thought in his heart, but he immediately rejected it because before entering the forest, the academy had already confiscated all the space tools that could be used to carry items on the body of all the students. Moreover, they had also undergone a strict inspection. Moreover, there was only one entrance to the forest. There was simply no opportunity to bring magic nuclei in from the outside. Moreover, even if it was really possible to bring magic nuclei in from the outside, Brigadier believed that no one would be so stupid as to take out more than 100 second-rank magic nuclei in one go, because this was bound to cause a shock in the entire academy. At that time, the academy would definitely send people to investigate this matter. Not far away, although her clothes were very tattered, but her appearance was very beautiful. Her eyes were a little absent-minded as she looked at Jianshin's back standing on the stage and muttered, "How is this possible? He is a new student who is not even a saint. Yet he actually obtained more than 100 second-rank magic nuclei." The soft and pleasant voice of the young girl was filled with shock and disbelief. On the other side, when the old man in charge of the examination announced the number of magic nuclei that Jianshin had obtained, Cheng Mingxiang's mouth was wide open in astonishment. He stared at Jianshin standing on the stage with a face full of disbelief. However, his face immediately became gloomy and was completely replaced by anger. This was because the top 3 in terms of the number of magic nuclei obtained from the hunting of magical beasts were all rewarded. Although these rewards were not in the eyes of the children born in big families, for them it represented a kind of honor and a symbol of strength. Originally, Cheng Mingxiang was ranked 3rd, but Jianshin forcefully squeezed him out of the top 3 ranks. This made him very angry in his heart, and what he couldn't accept was that Jianshin's strength was not even a saint. Changyang Shoden. In the blink of an eye, Cheng Mingxiang's face had become incomparably gloomy. His gaze towards Jianshin was filled with resentment. In the crowd, Luo Jian's face was also gloomy. His eyes were filled with resentment as he stared at Jianshin on the stage. His sharp gaze was as if he wanted to eat Jianshin alive. Now, although Jianshin's strength was weak, his spirit could be said to be very powerful. If one looked at him with ordinary eyes, he might not be able to sense it. However, if one looked at him with a particularly sharp gaze, his spirit would immediately sense it. Therefore, Luo Jian and Cheng Mingxiang's gazes, filled with resentment, were immediately sensed by Jianshin. Jianshin slightly turned his head, and relying on his powerful spirit to sense the direction, he very easily found Luo Jian, who was submerged in the crowd. Looking at Luo Jian's gloomy expression, Jianshin coldly smiled. He didn't take it to heart. He had robbed all the magic cores in Luo Jian's hands, causing him to be unable to complete his mission. Moreover, he had also injured him. It was normal for him to have resentment towards himself. However, when Jianshin's gaze fell on Cheng Mingxiang, his brows slightly wrinkled. At the same time, his face revealed a trace of helplessness. There was no hatred between him and Cheng Mingxiang. Previously, when he had a small conflict with Cheng Mingxiang outside the library, it was not enough to make Cheng Mingxiang resent him so much. The biggest reason for this was because he had squeezed Cheng Mingxiang out of the top 3. After all, to be able to obtain the top 3 results in the competition of all the students in the school was simply a great honor for them, especially those disciples who were born in noble families. This honor could simply raise their status abruptly. If it was any other top 10 master who squeezed Cheng Mingxiang out of the top 3, he would absolutely not feel any displeasure in his heart. However, this time the person who squeezed him out of the top 3 was not a top 10 master, but a freshman who he had never put in his eyes. This made Cheng Mingxiang, who was known as a cultivation genius in Kargath Academy, feel a burst of humiliation in his heart. He didn't expect that a freshman who had just entered the school would ride on his head. This made him resent Jianqin in his heart. Although there was still Tai Ta was the dean's disciple. Even if Cheng Mingxiang had a powerful background, he did not dare to casually offend the dean. The old man in charge of the assessment took a deep breath and did his best to calm himself down. He looked deeply at Jianqin and smiled. "Changyang Shoten, you have really shocked me. I didn't expect that you would be able to obtain so many second-rank monster cores with your strength, not even at the Saint Realm. This has already surpassed the current number 1 in terms of monster cores, Bugadier. It seems that the first place this time will belong to none other than you." After saying that, the old man handed over the space belt that belonged to Jianqin and a medal of honor to him. Jianqin chuckled and took the items from the old man. He said, "Teacher, you're exaggerating. It's still hard to say who the first place will belong to. After all, there is still Tai Ta behind me. He has no less monster cores than me." After saying that, Jianqin took out all the monster cores from his space belt. Hearing Jianqin's words, the old man looked meaningfully at Jianqin and smiled, but did not say anything. After Jianqin put away all the second-rank monster cores on the table into his space belt, he directly walked off the platform. After that, Iron Tower came to the desk and took out all the Tier 2 monster cores from his spatial belt. After all, Taita had entered the 3rd region with Jianqin, so the monster cores he obtained were equally distributed. As a result, the number of monster cores in his space belt was almost the same as Jianqin's. In the end, the old man in charge of the assessment counted that Taita had a total of 127 second-rank monster cores, which was only 1 less than Jianqin's. When the old man in charge of the assessment announced that Taita had a total of 2 rank monster cores, all the teachers and students were shocked, speechless, once again. Below the platform, Jing Mingyue, who was ranked 5th on the list of top 10 experts of Kargath Academy, stood there in a daze. Her eyes seemed a little absent-minded. She was originally ranked 2nd, but now she had been pushed down by 2 new students who had suddenly appeared. This result was a little unacceptable to her. After all, she had spent a lot of effort to obtain those monster cores. She really could not imagine how 2 new students who had just entered the academy this year and had not even reached Saint Realm had obtained so many monster cores. At this moment, a very beautiful girl came up to Jing Mingyue and intimately hugged her waist. She chuckled. "Sister Jing, you didn't expect that, right? You were originally ranked 2nd, but you were actually pushed down by 2 new students this year." Hearing that, Jing Mingyue sighed and said with a bitter smile, "I really didn't expect that 2 new students who have not even reached Saint Realm would have so many monster cores. Even the number 1 expert of our Kargath Academy, Bugadier, was forcefully pushed down to 3rd place. I really don't know how they obtained the monster cores in their hands. Could it be that they really brought them in from outside?" Hearing this, the young woman chuckled and said, "Big Sister Jing, you've guessed wrongly. I believe that they obtained those Class 2 monster cores with their own strength, and they didn't bring them in from the outside like you've imagined." The girl's words stunned Jing Mingyue. She immediately turned her head and looked at the girl with a puzzled expression. She asked curiously, "Xiao Lu, why do you say that?" The girl smiled mysteriously, and a trace of pride appeared on her face. Then she lowered her voice and said, Sister Jing, I met the two of them in the second region and stayed with them for a day. You mustn't underestimate them. They are very powerful, especially that Chanyang Shoten. He used a broken iron rod to kill rank 1 magical beasts in one strike several times. He directly pierced through the throats of magical beasts. Really? Jing Mingyue's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. She clearly didn't believe it. Of course I saw it with my own eyes. It can't be fake. The young girl puffed out her chest and said with certainty. Also, that night, we were attacked by more than 20 green wolves. The two of them killed all of them without much effort. What? You're saying that the two of them killed all of the green wolves? Hearing this, Jing Mingyue could no longer maintain her composure, and a trace of horror appeared on her face. Although her strength had reached the high-level Saint realm, she could only flee in the face of more than 20 level 1 magical beasts, let alone kill them. The girl nodded firmly and said, Yes, Sister Jing, I saw it with my own eyes. Although Chanyang Shoten and Tai Ta haven't condensed a saint weapon yet, they're no weaker than saints. That's why I'm certain that they didn't bring the monster cores in from outside. Hearing that, Jing Mingyue lowered her head and pondered. She didn't show any dissatisfaction at being pushed out of the top 3 by Jianqin and Tai Ta. From this, it could be seen that Jing Mingyue wasn't a narrow-minded person. After the examination of the monster cores was completed, the award ceremony was held immediately. The top 3 rankers in terms of the number of Tier 1 and Tier 2 monster cores obtained in this event would receive the same rewards. The first ranker would be rewarded with a Tier 4 monster core and an honor badge made entirely of purple gold. The second and third rankers would be rewarded with a Tier 3 monster core and an honor badge made entirely of gold. Although these medals weren't worth much, the significance they represented was extraordinary. As a result, even the disciples of nobles with some backing were extremely envious of these medals of honor. As for Jian Chen and Tai Ta, they were ranked first and second in terms of the amount of Class 1 and Class 2 monster cores they obtained. Therefore, the two of them received double rewards. The third in terms of Class 1 monster cores was still Mu Tian, while the third in terms of Class 2 monster cores was the top of the Kargath Academy's 10 great experts ranking Brigadier. Chapter 53. When the award ceremony was over, the thousands of students on the field left in the blink of an eye. Almost all of the students had suffered injuries of varying degrees after fighting with the magical beasts in the forest for the past 3 days. Now that the award ceremony was over, everyone returned to their respective dormitories to recuperate. Those who remained on the field were mostly the students who had given up on their missions in advance and were in good condition. However, after experiencing this incident, Jianchen and Tai Ta's reputation in Kargath Academy suddenly rose to the peak. They had become the biggest celebrities in Kargath Academy. Almost everywhere, one could hear the topic of the two of them. After the award ceremony ended, Jianchen, Tai Ta, and Big Brother Chanyang, who hurriedly bid farewell and returned to their dormitories to recuperate from their injuries. At the center of the academy, there was a tower that occupied an area of 100 meters. At the top of the tower, Vice Principal by N was standing in the middle of the room with a respectful expression. In front of him, the Dean of Kargath Academy was leisurely sitting in front of his desk with a faint smile on his face. That pair of deep eyes actually carried traces of happiness and excitement. By N, it seems that a genius has appeared in our Kargath Academy this time. The dean's face was filled with a happy smile. His tone was full of excitement. Vice Principal by N nodded and said with a smile, "Dean, you are wrong. This time, our Kargath Academy didn't only have one genius, but two. They are respectively Chanyang Shoten and Tai Ta." Hearing this, the dean slightly shook his head and said with a smile, "That's right, Tai Ta's talent is indeed very high. Moreover, he has the advantage of being born with divine strength. But compared to Chanyang Shoten, the difference is too big." Hearing this, Vice Principal Bayan's face showed a trace of surprise. He doubtfully said, "Dean, why do you say so?" The dean let out a long sigh and said, "Don't underestimate Changyang Shoten. He's not a simple person. No wonder old man Chang from Changyang Prefecture kept praising him. Actually, when I received news that Changyang Shoten and Taita had killed a Class 2 magical beast in the third area yesterday afternoon, I had already rushed over and secretly observed the two of them. Although the two of them haven't advanced to saint level yet, their battle prowess can't be underestimated, especially Changyang Shoten. With a broken iron rod, he is almost invincible in the third area. Not only is his attack speed extremely fast, but it is also very accurate. His battle experience is so rich that it doesn't seem like a 15-year-old boy at all, but more like a person who has experienced hundreds of battles. Almost all of the Class 2 monster cores that died at their hands were killed by Changyang Shoten alone. Iron Tower only played a role as a distraction. Hearing this, Vice Principal Bai-Un's face was filled with disbelief. He said, "Dean, is Changyang Shoten really as powerful as you say?" The dean nodded and said, "If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed that a 15-year-old boy could be so powerful. The most important thing is his rich battle experience and fighting skills. This isn't something that can be learned just because you want to. It's impossible to grasp these things without going through hundreds of battles. No wonder old man Chang kept praising Changyang Shoten. He really is very talented. It seems that old man Chang taught him these things." Hearing this, Vice Principal Bai-Un's face showed a trace of relief. He said, "With Master Chang Wuji's guidance, it'll be difficult for Changyang Shoten not to make a name for himself in the future." The dean nodded slightly and said, "Although he has old man Chang's guidance, if he doesn't have extraordinary talent, he won't be able to learn anything even with old man Chang's guidance. If Changyang Shoten wasn't the fourth young master of Changyang Prefecture, I would have accepted him as my disciple. After all, such a genius is rare. If he can grow up in the future, it'll be a blessing for the kingdom of Jessen." After the award ceremony, Jianchen received a new set of uniform and went to take a bath. He washed off all the dirt on his body from the past few days in the forest. He then put on the brand new uniform and returned to his dorm room, feeling refreshed. Although he had been fighting for the past 3 days in the forest, Jianchen did not show any signs of fatigue. In his previous life, Jianchen had experienced crueler things than this. After returning to his dorm room, Jianchen sat cross-legged on his bed. He held a Class 1 monster core in each hand and began to cultivate. Although Jianchen's strength had reached the pinnacle of the 10th stage of Saint Force, he could clearly feel that the Saint Force in his body had not yet reached a state of saturation. As the energy within the monster cores was continuously absorbed by Jianchen, the Saint Force in Jianchen's body also grew at a rapid rate. The speed of his cultivation was 10 times faster than when he absorbed the Yuan Qi of the world. In the following 3 days, other than eating, Jianchen spent all his time cultivating in his dorm room. After 3 days of cultivation, the Saint Force in his body had reached a state of saturation. At this moment, no matter how much energy Jianchen absorbed from the monster cores, the Saint Force in his body would not continue to grow. Jianchen knew that he should break through to the Saint realm now and condense a Saint weapon. Otherwise, the Saint Force in his body would forever stagnate. Jianchen had already understood the steps and methods to condense a Saint weapon and become a Saint from the Academy's library. It was to use one's will to condense all the Saint Force in one's body and slowly form a weapon. Finally, it would fuse with one's spirit and perfectly fuse together. Once all the Saint Force in one's body had condensed into a weapon, one would officially become a Saint realm expert. Jianchen did not stop for even a moment. He took out a Class 4 monster core from his space belt in case he needed it. He then immediately began to prepare to condense a Saint weapon and break through to the Saint realm. The Saint Force in Jianchen's Dantian was firmly controlled by his powerful spirit. In front of his powerful spirit, Jianqin had absolute control over the saint force in his dantian. With a thought, Jianqin slowly gathered all the saint force in his dantian, slowly forming the shape of a sword. Finally, he began to compress it slowly. Jianqin's powerful spirit had been brought over from his previous life. It was far more powerful than ordinary people when it was born. Before his powerful spirit, the relatively weak saint force in his body could not resist at all. It was completely suppressed by Jianqin's powerful spirit. Afterward, it began to compress according to the shape of the sword formed by the saint force. As the saint force was constantly compressed, the saint force that filled Jianqin's dantian rapidly decreased. Although this was the case, the saint force in his dantian was constantly increasing in strength. The sword formed from saint force gradually became clearer. In the end, it became an extremely small sword in his dantian. At the same time, Jianqin also began to absorb the saint force. Although Jianqin had successfully condensed all the saint force in his dantian into a sword, it did not mean that he had reached Saint Realm. There was still one final step, which was also the most difficult step. It was this step that prevented many people from reaching Saint Realm in their entire lives. The final step was to fuse a part of his spirit into the sword formed from saint force in his dantian and establish a mental connection with it. At the same time, he had to completely fuse the strand of spirit with the saint weapon in his dantian. This step seemed simple, but it was actually extremely difficult. Although this step was extremely difficult in the eyes of ordinary people, it was nothing difficult for Jianqin, who was extremely powerful and could use it as he pleased. Jianqin directly fused a strand of his spirit into the saint weapon in his dantian. Afterward, under his skilled control, the strand of spirit connected with the saint weapon very quickly. In the end, it completely fused with the saint weapon, no longer separating them. At this moment, Jianqin had truly become a true saint. The hurdle of reaching Saint Realm posed no obstruction to him at all. When Jianqin's strand of spirit fused with the saint weapon in his dantian, Jianqin suddenly experienced a strange feeling. It was as if the sword, completely condensed from saint force in his dantian, had become a part of him. Not only could he control it as he wished, but he could also clearly sense every part of the sword structure. Right now, there was no longer any saint force in Jianqin's dantian. There was only a sword completely condensed from saint force in his dantian, acting as a source of energy. The sword seemed extremely small. In terms of thickness and length, it was no different from an embroidery needle. Now that the saint weapon had been condensed, Jianqin could clearly sense that the pulses of energy from the saint weapon were several times more powerful than before. Without any exaggeration, a person who had reached Saint Realm could easily defeat someone at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force in an open battle. Unless something unexpected happened or something special happened, it was impossible for someone at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force to defeat a Saint Realm expert. However, between Jianqin and Deity, one was powerful. Deity was born with great strength, and his body was extremely tough. Even Jianqin, who had been refining his body with saint force since he was young, was no match for him. His abnormal strength and powerful defense were enough to make up for the lack of saint force. Unless the difference in strength was too great, he would not be Deity's opponent at all. At most, they would be able to fight to a draw. Although Jianqin was able to defeat an intermediate Saint Realm expert at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, it was all because of the experience and battle techniques he had brought from his previous life. Jianqin's swift sword techniques and his attainments in the way of the sword, as well as the battle intent he had tempered through many life and death battles in his previous life, were enough to make him an invincible existence among those at the same level as him. Challenging those at a higher level was nothing to him. At this moment, Jianqin's expression suddenly changed. Following that, his dantian began to tremble violently. His entire dantian began to fluctuate in an unstable state. As soon as the fluctuations began, before Jianqin could react, The surrounding yuan qi began to surge wildly. All the yuan qi in a radius of several kilometers seemed to be affected by an invisible suction force, rushing to gather in Jianqin's direction. At this moment, Jianqin's body seemed to have escaped his control. All the pores on his body suddenly opened up, wildly absorbing the dense yuan qi in the surroundings. The energy within the Class 4 monster core in Jianqin's hand began to leak out at an extremely terrifying speed. In the end, it formed a visible energy ribbon that flowed into Jianqin's body,